Hey there, tonight we're diving into the resourceful world of Native American tribes as they navigated European encounters. What you're about to discover is how their resilience and adaptability shaped unexpected alliances and ingenious survival tactics. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. In the grand tapestry of history, 1492 stands out like a fluorescent highlighter on a dusty old map. You find yourself smack dab in the middle of a cultural collision, one that'll reshape the world forever. You're navigating life in a Native American tribe when suddenly your world is about to get a lot more crowded, courtesy of some uninvited guests from across the ocean. And these guests, they don't exactly RSVP or bring wine. Enter Christopher Columbus, the Italian explorer who somehow convinced the Spanish crown to bankroll his oceanic road trip. The guy didn't even have Google Maps, yet here he is, landing in the Bahamas, thinking he hit the jackpot in India. Classic Columbus. Let's just say geographical accuracy wasn't his strong suit. But hey, he did bring along a few hundred sailors, 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and a heap of unintended consequences. Now, you as a member of a Native American tribe might see these pale strangers with their shiny armor and peculiar habits and think, what in the world? They, on the other hand, are equally baffled by your lifestyle, your rich culture, and the fact that you've been thriving on these lands for centuries without their so-called civilized ways. Misunderstandings. Oh, they're about to be the theme of the century. The initial encounters were a mix of curiosity, cautious smiles, and awkward hand gestures. Early trade exchanges were a bit like a bizarre flea market. You offer them maize, tobacco, and perhaps a few tips on surviving in this new world. In return, they hand over beads, metal tools, and the occasional mirror. Shiny objects for precious resources. Seems like a fair trade, right? Well, that depends on who you ask. But let's get real for a moment. Behind the quaint trade fairs lay a darker truth. Along with beads and trinkets, these visitors brought something far deadlier. Diseases like smallpox and measles. Lacking immunity, indigenous populations faced catastrophic losses. We're talking about an estimated 90% decline in some areas over just a few decades. Now that's a statistic that'll make anyone shiver. Meanwhile, competition for resources started heating up faster than a jalapeno in a microwave. European demand for things like fur, gold, and land was insatiable, and on their quest for wealth, they weren't exactly playing by the rules of polite society. These newcomers had a knack for claiming land with a flag and a prayer, ignoring the fact that people actually lived there. It's like walking into someone's home, plopping down on their couch, and declaring it yours because you brought your own cushion. But amidst the chaos, certain figures emerge, shaping the course of history. Columbus might get the headlines, but let's not forget the indigenous leaders who navigated this turbulent time with resilience and ingenuity. Take, for example, the Taino people, who first greeted Columbus. Their chief, or cacique, negotiated, resisted, and adapted in ways that often go unsung. Yet their story is critical to understanding these early encounters. The arrival of Europeans wasn't just a story of conquest and disease. It was also a tale of surprising alliances and adaptations. Many tribes strategically engaged with European powers to outmaneuver rival tribes. This wasn't just survival, it was savvy diplomacy. And while Hollywood might paint these interactions as simple battles of good versus evil, the reality was far more complex. In the end, this period marked the beginning of profound changes for Native American societies. Some changes were embraced, others resisted, and many were simply endured. As the sun sets on this chapter, you're left standing at the edge of a new world, one that's as uncertain as it is inevitable. But one thing's for sure, the story of these first encounters is only just beginning. As you stand on the brink of this new world, ready to plunge into the abyss of history, let's not kid ourselves. Survival wasn't just a matter of luck or the strength of one's immune system. It required a cunning mix of diplomacy, economic acumen, and a dash of opportunism. You know, the kind of stuff that would make Wall Street brokers nod in approval. Enter the fur trade, the unsung hero or villain, depending on your perspective of this historical drama. Picture it. Beaver pelts so coveted that they could practically be used as currency. Forget Bitcoin. In the 17th century, it was all about the beaver. Your tribe, keenly aware of the European appetite for these furry commodities, dives headfirst into this new economic opportunity. Now, let's get this straight. The fur trade wasn't just about swapping pelts for pots and pans. It was a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and strategic marriages that would make a soap opera look like a children's bedtime story. The French, the English, and the Spanish were the big players in this game, each vying for the title of most likely to exploit the New World. And here, the Native American tribes weren't just pawns on a chessboard. They were the grandmasters. Take the Iroquois Confederacy, for instance. A political powerhouse long before any European set foot on their land, the Iroquois were a confederation of 5, and later 6, nations that knew a thing or two about diplomacy. They played the French and the English against each other like a maestro conducting a symphony of self-interest. When the French came a-courting, offering guns and iron tools in exchange for pelts, the Iroquois saw an opportunity. Why not use these newfangled weapons to bolster their own power and keep their adversaries in check? But the Iroquois weren't the only ones with a flair for negotiation. On the Great Plains, tribes like the Sioux and the Cheyenne embraced the horse, a gift from the Spanish, as a ticket to a nomadic lifestyle that would redefine their societies. These were not mere cultural exchanges. They were strategic moves in a high-stakes game of survival. And let's face it, the horse was the medieval equivalent of a sports car, transforming hunting and warfare in ways that the Europeans couldn't have predicted. Meanwhile, in the southeast, the Creek and the Cherokee found themselves entangled in a web of treaties and trade agreements with the English settlers. They knew that aligning with the Europeans could tip the balance of power in their favor against rival tribes. But this was no fairy tale alliance. It was a marriage of convenience, the kind where both parties keep one eye on the exit. It's easy to romanticize these alliances as idyllic partnerships, but let's not gloss over the fact that they were often fraught with betrayal and shifting loyalties. When the English and French clashed in the French and Indian War, 1754-1763, many tribes found themselves caught in the crossfire, their alliances tested like never before. The Iroquois Confederacy, for example, managed to maintain a delicate neutrality for much of the conflict, skillfully maneuvering to protect their interests. But neutrality was a tightrope walk, and one false step could send you plummeting into the abyss of colonial retribution. So, what's the takeaway here? Simply put, Native American tribes weren't passive victims of European colonization. They were active players, using every tool at their disposal to navigate the treacherous waters of imperial ambition. They were diplomats, traders, and warriors, employing strategies that were as complex and varied as the tribes themselves. Sure, it's tempting to cast this era in black and white terms, to paint the Europeans as greedy conquerors and the Native Americans as noble savages, a myth that persists in pop culture to this day. But the truth is, history is rarely so simple. It's a tapestry woven with threads of cooperation and conflict, resistance and adaptation. And as you stand here, peering into the past, it's clear that the story of Native American survival is one of resilience and ingenuity. It's a testament to the human spirit, to the ability to adapt and thrive even in the face of overwhelming odds. And while the next chapter of this saga remains unwritten, one thing is certain. The echoes of this turbulent era continue to resonate, shaping the world we live in today. And speaking of echoes, let's tune in to the resonating sounds of cultural fusion and adaptation that marked these historic encounters. The narrative isn't just a simple tale of European dominance over indigenous cultures. Oh no, it's far richer and more tangled than that. Think of it as history's own version of a reality show, complete with unexpected alliances, dramatic betrayals, and the occasional makeover. First, let's tackle the myth of the noble savage, that old chestnut of a stereotype. This romanticized notion paints Native Americans as pure, unspoiled beings living in pristine harmony with nature, untouched by the complexities and corruption of civilization. Cue the violins, right? But the truth is, native societies were as multifaceted as any other, with their own politics, economies, and yes, cultural innovations. Consider the adoption of horses by the Plains tribes. When the Spanish first brought horses to the Americas in the 16th century, they probably didn't anticipate the transformative impact these animals would have. For the Plains tribes, horses were like a turbo boost in a video game. Suddenly, everything changed. The Comanche, Sioux, and Cheyenne, among others, became expert horsemen, revolutionizing their hunting practices and warfare. By the 18th century, the sight of a mounted warrior galloping across the prairie was as iconic as it was formidable. But why were horses such a game changer? Simple, mobility and speed. A bison hunt that might have taken days on foot could now be accomplished in hours. Warfare tactics evolved, too, with mounted raids becoming a strategic advantage. The horse wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of freedom and power. And let's not kid ourselves. These tribes weren't just borrowing a European commodity, they were redefining their own cultures around it. And speaking of redefining, let's talk about agriculture. The introduction of European crops and livestock had some native communities embracing a new kind of farming. While traditional crops like maize and squash remained staples, the addition of new species like wheat and barley offered dietary variety and economic opportunities. But it wasn't a simple swap. It was an agricultural remix. Native farmers adapted European techniques to suit their environments, creating hybrid systems that were uniquely their own. This brings us to the fur trade, an economic juggernaut that reshaped the continent's cultural landscape. By the 17th century, beaver pelts were all the rage in Europe, and everyone from French voyageurs to British traders was eager to get in on the action. But here's the kicker. Native tribes weren't just suppliers. They were key players in this booming industry. They navigated trade networks with the acumen of seasoned CEOs, establishing relationships that often went beyond mere commerce. Take the Huron-Wendat, for example. Situated in present-day Canada, they became crucial intermediaries between French traders and other indigenous groups. This wasn't just about trading goods. It was about cultivating influence and securing alliances. And let's not forget the role of women in these exchanges. Indigenous women often acted as cultural brokers, marrying European traders to cement ties and facilitate trade. It was a merger of social and economic interests that challenged European gender norms and demonstrated the adaptability of native societies. Now, about those European traders. If you're picturing them as suave negotiators with a penchant for fair play, think again. Many were opportunists, driven by profit and willing to exploit any advantage. This wasn't a mutual admiration society. It was a cutthroat market where alliances could shift as quickly as the wind. The fur trade was a gold rush of sorts, with all the greed and chaos that implies. Yet, amid the tumult, native tribes demonstrated remarkable resilience, leveraging their knowledge and networks to navigate this new economic reality. But not all exchanges were beneficial. The cultural collision brought by Europeans also introduced destructive elements. Alcohol, for instance, became a devastating problem. Traders used it as a bargaining chip, and it wreaked havoc on communities unaccustomed to its effects. It wasn't just a drink, it was a weapon of social disruption, one that would leave lasting scars. The narrative of the noble savage often overlooks these harsh realities, preferring to focus on idyllic scenes of peace and simplicity. But acknowledging the challenges faced by native communities doesn't diminish their resilience, it highlights it. These were societies that adapted, innovated, and survived in the face of unprecedented change. And let's not forget the role of innovation in arts and crafts. The introduction of European materials like glass beads and metal tools didn't just spark economic interest, it fueled a creative renaissance. Native artisans incorporated these new materials into traditional crafts, producing items that were both culturally significant and commercially viable. These were not mere trinkets, they were powerful symbols of cultural adaptation. So, what have we learned from this whirlwind tour of cultural exchange? That history is a dance, a complex choreography of give and take, adaptation and resistance. The myth of the noble savage is just that, a myth. The reality was far more dynamic, with Native American tribes demonstrating a remarkable capacity for resilience and innovation. As we stand on the brink of the next chapter, let's remember that the story of Native American survival isn't just one of hardship, it's also one of triumph. The echoes of these encounters continue to shape the world today, reminding us of the power of cultural resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. And this is where we'll pause, leaving you on the edge of your seat for what comes next. Stay tuned. So here we are, standing on the precipice of another chapter in this wild saga of cultural collision, where the Native American tribes refused to simply fade into the background noise of history. They weren't just passive footnotes in the European conquest narrative. They were the authors of their own stories, wielding resistance like a finely honed weapon. And while Hollywood might love a good underdog story, the reality was more complex, often brutal, and certainly not wrapped up with a tidy bow. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Native American resistance, starting with Pontiac's War in 1763. Picture this: you're Pontiac, an Odawa war chief, and you've had just about enough of British posturing. The British, fresh from their victory in the French and Indian War, are strutting around like peacocks, oblivious to the fact that their new policies and attitudes are about as welcome as a skunk at a garden party. Gone are the days of French diplomacy and gift-giving. Now, all about British arrogance and restrictive policies, like the Proclamation of 1763, which cheekily tries to draw a line along the Appalachian Mountains and say, "Stay put." But here's the kicker: Pontiac and his confederacy of tribes aren't buying it. Pontiac's war wasn't a random burst of rebellion. It was a calculated, multi-tribal effort involving at least 8 different tribes. We're talking about a full-on siege of British forts, including the infamous attack on Fort Detroit. Pontiac wasn't just swinging blindly. He was orchestrating a strategic symphony of resistance, using guerrilla tactics that would make any modern military strategist nod in approval. The war lasted over 2 years, a testament to the resilience and tenacity of the tribes involved. And while the British might have eventually regained control, the conflict left them rattled, and for good reason. It exposed their vulnerability and forced them to rethink their approach to Native American relations. Fast forward to the early 19th century and cue the entrance of Tecumseh, the charismatic Shawnee leader who could rally a crowd with the fervor of a rock star. Tecumseh's vision was nothing short of revolutionary: a unified indigenous confederacy stretching from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, a formidable barrier against American expansion. If you thought the idea of a united Europe was ambitious, Tecumseh was dreaming even bigger. Tecumseh wasn't just a dreamer, he was a pragmatist. His brother, Tenskwatawa, known as the Prophet, provided the spiritual backbone to their movement, preaching a return to traditional ways and a rejection of European goods and practices. Together, they built a settlement at Prophetstown, near the Tippecanoe River, which became the epicenter of their resistance. But Tecumseh's charm and oratory skills were his real superpowers, persuading tribes to put aside long-standing rivalries in favor of a common goal. The showdown came in 1811 at the Battle of Tippecanoe. While Tecumseh was away rallying more support, American forces led by future President William Henry Harrison decided to attack. The battle was brutal. Think chaos, confusion, and carnage. The Americans claimed victory, but at a high cost, suffering significant casualties. And while the battle was a setback for Tecumseh's confederacy, it didn't extinguish the flame of resistance. Tecumseh's alliance faced its ultimate test during the War of 1812, when he threw his support behind the British, hoping they might help curb American expansion. In a twist of history, he became a brigadier general in the British Army, leading his forces with the kind of passion that could inspire even the most jaded soldiers. But the alliance was fraught with its own challenges, and Tecumseh's tragic death at the Battle of the Thames in 1813 marked the end of his confederacy's grand vision. These stories of resistance, Pontiac's War, and Tecumseh's confederacy highlight the brutal realities of Native American struggles against colonial forces. They weren't just fighting for land, they were fighting for survival, identity, and autonomy. And while the romanticized legends of noble chiefs and valiant warriors have their allure, the truth is far grittier. These leaders were strategists, diplomats, and sometimes casualties of their own ambitious dreams. But let's not gloss over the economic and political complexities that fueled these conflicts. The British and later the Americans weren't just after land. They were after resources, trade routes, and the economic dominance that came with them. For the tribes, Resisting wasn't just about preserving their way of life. It was about controlling their destinies in a rapidly changing world. And while these epic tales of resistance might make for good stories, they also serve as stark reminders of the harsh realities faced by Native American tribes. The power dynamics were rarely in their favor, and the cost of resistance was often paid in blood. Yet, despite the odds, they persisted, adapting their strategies and seeking new alliances in a relentless quest for autonomy. So, as we pause and catch our breath, remember this. The story of Native American resistance isn't just one of defiance. It's a testament to resilience, innovation, and the unyielding human spirit. And as we prepare to delve deeper into this era of conflict and change, one thing is clear. The echoes of these struggles continue to reverberate through history, reminding us that the fight for justice and recognition is far from over. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll unravel even more of this tangled web of history. And here we find ourselves, unraveling the tangled web of history, where the stories of resistance and survival weave into the broader narrative of European colonization's long shadow. The impacts of these encounters weren't just fleeting moments in dusty old books. They're the echoes that still reverberate in every corner of modern Native American life. It's a saga of survival, adaptation, and let's face it, a whole lot of legal wrangling that would make any courtroom drama look like a day at the beach. Let's dive headfirst into the quagmire that is the legacy of land. The land, after all, was at the heart of it all, sacred, storied, and unfortunately, snatched away faster than you can say, manifest destiny. Post-colonization, native land holdings dwindled to a fraction of their original expanse. We're talking a nosedive from millions of acres to mere slivers, thanks to a series of treaties that often read like a bad joke. The 1830 Indian Removal Act, for example, saw the forceful relocation of tens of thousands of Native Americans, leading to the infamous Trail of Tears, a journey that claimed the lives of around 4,000 Cherokee alone. And they called it a treaty, as if that somehow softened the blow. Fast forward to the 20th century, the era of glitz, glam, and, quite frankly, a lot of governmental head-scratching over what to do about all this land. Enter the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, legislative attempt to undo some of the damage by restoring self-governance and returning some lands. It was like sprinkling sugar on a sour lemon, well-intentioned, but hardly a sweet fix. And while it did lead to the establishment of numerous tribal governments, the struggle for land rights was only just beginning. Cue the legal battles, the courtroom dramas that make law and order look like a walk in the park. Throughout the 20th and into the 21st century, native tribes have fought tooth and nail in courts to reclaim their land and sovereignty. One of the most significant victories came with the 1980 Supreme Court decision in United States v. Sioux Nation of Indians, where the court acknowledged that the Black Hills were unlawfully taken from the Sioux. The government offered a compensation package worth over $1 billion, but the Sioux have consistently refused the money, insisting instead on the return of their sacred lands. It's a poignant reminder that for many tribes, some things are simply not for sale. But land isn't the only battleground. Cultural preservation has become a front line in its own right. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA, of 1990 marked a significant milestone, mandating the return of human remains and cultural artifacts to their respective tribes. It's a law that acknowledges a past of grave robbing disguised as archaeology, a grim reminder that even in death, Native Americans couldn't escape exploitation. Since its enactment, thousands of remains and artifacts have been returned, a small but meaningful step in acknowledging past wrongs. And then there's language, the living heartbeat of any culture. Many Native American languages faced near extinction, victims of assimilation policies that were about as subtle as a sledgehammer. Boarding schools, those infamous institutions designed to kill the Indian, save the man, did a number on indigenous languages, encouraging, or rather, enforcing, English as the language of the future. Yet, in a delightful twist of resilience, many tribes have launched language revitalization programs, breathing life back into words that once teetered on the brink of oblivion. Today, programs across the U.S. and Canada are dedicated to teaching these languages to new generations, ensuring that the voices of the past continue to speak into the future. All of these modern battles, legal, cultural, linguistic, are part of the enduring legacy of those first encounters. They remind us that history isn't just a static record of what happened. It's a living, breathing force that shapes identities, communities, and futures. The romanticized images of stoic warriors and wise chiefs might draw a tear or two, but the real story is one of grit and tenacity, of communities refusing to be relegated to footnotes in someone else's narrative. As we wrap up this saga, let's take a moment to consider the broader implications. The story of Native American resilience isn't just about survival against the odds. It's a testament to the human spirit's capacity for adaptation, innovation, and perseverance. It's a story that challenges us to rethink our own narratives, to question the myths we've inherited and the truths we've ignored. So, what's the takeaway from this whirlwind journey through history? Perhaps it's this: the past isn't a distant land, but a mirror reflecting our present and future. The stories of Native American tribes are not relics of a bygone era, but vital threads in the tapestry of our shared humanity. They remind us that the fight for justice, recognition, and dignity is ongoing, a struggle that demands our attention, our respect, and our action. And as you, dear listener, drift off with new knowledge, remember that history isn't just a series of events. It's a call to action, a reminder that the stories we tell shape the world we build. So, let's tell them well, honor the complexities, and keep listening to the voices that have been singing for centuries, ensuring they're never silenced. As the echoes of history continue to resonate, let's engage with them, learn from them, and most importantly, let them guide us toward a more just and inclusive future. In the bustling streets of Atlanta, Georgia, where the sweet aroma of pecan pie mingles with the steady hum of city life, a young boy named Michael King Jr. grows up in a world poised on the precipice of change. Yes, you heard that right. Michael King Jr. Before he became the iconic Martin Luther King Jr. His birth certificate read Michael, after his father, Michael King Sr. Talk about a plot twist worthy of a soap opera. The name change came courtesy of Papa King, inspired by a trip to Germany in 1934, where he learned about the Protestant Reformation leader, Martin Luther. The elder King was so taken by the Reformer's legacy that he returned home, rebranded, and bestowed the same honor upon his unsuspecting 5-year-old son. Fast forward a few years, and young Martin, or Michael, depending on which decade of his life you're focusing on, is navigating the segregated world of the American South. It's the 1930 and 40, and racial segregation is as American as apple pie. You could say young Martin's environment was a real-life schooling in injustice, one that would later fuel his fiery oratory and relentless activism. And while those Sunday sermons at Ebenezer Baptist Church, where his father preached about love and justice, certainly left a mark, Martin's education didn't stop there. At 15, Martin took a leap into higher education at the historically black Morehouse College. That's right, 15. Most of us were busy figuring out how to parallel park at that age, but Martin was already knee-deep in college-level philosophy and sociology. Morehouse, under the presidency of Benjamin E. Mays, an impressive figure in his own right, who challenged the status quo and pushed for racial equality, served as a crucible for Martin's burgeoning intellectual curiosity. By the time Martin graduated in 1948 with a sociology degree, he developed a profound understanding of the world's injustices and, more importantly, the framework to challenge them. But he wasn't done yet. Next stop, Boston University, where he would earn his Ph.D. in systematic theology by the ripe old age of 26. It was here that Martin stumbled upon the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, and the concept of non-violent resistance struck him like a lightning bolt. Imagine, if you will, young Martin in Boston, braving the New England winter and discovering the revolutionary power of civil disobedience. Gandhi's triumphs in India became a blueprint for Martin's future endeavors back home. It was all about wielding the power of non-violence like a precision instrument, rather than a blunt force club. He saw non-violent protest as not just a strategy, but a way of life, a stance that would soon become the backbone of the American civil rights movement. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before he could lead marches and deliver speeches, that would echo through history. Martin had some personal business to attend to in Boston. Enter Coretta Scott, a fellow student, and soon the love of his life. Their courtship was what you'd call a meeting of the minds, rooted in shared ideals and a mutual desire for justice and equality. They married in 1953, and Coretta became not just Martin's partner, but an essential pillar in his burgeoning civil rights crusade. Now, let's hit pause on the romance and circle back to Martin's philosophical awakening. While Gandhi's influence was pivotal, Martin also drew from a rich tapestry of thinkers and theologians. The teachings of theologian Reinhold Niebuhr added heft to his understanding of social ethics, while the writings of philosopher Henry David Thoreau on civil disobedience provided a sharper edge. Martin was amassing an intellectual arsenal, ready to take on the systemic racism entrenched in American society. And then there was the matter of his oratorical prowess. Some folks are born with the gift of gab, but Martin honed his speaking skills with the precision of a master craftsman. He could deliver a sermon that would resonate like a jazz musician hitting that perfect note, compelling, rhythmic, and impossible to ignore. His speeches were a symphony of hope and urgency, blending the cadence of a preacher with the logic of a philosopher. So, there you have it, a snapshot of how a preacher's kid from Atlanta, originally named Michael, transformed into Martin Luther King Jr., the towering figure of the civil rights movement. His early life was a tapestry woven with family influence, academic rigor, and a relentless quest for justice. And as we say goodbye to this chapter, remember, the man who would have a dream was once a boy with a different name, dreaming of a world yet to be. Stay tuned, because Martin's story is just warming up, and the pages ahead are filled with battles, triumphs, and a legacy that would change the course of history. And so, the stage was set for Martin Luther King Jr. to step into the spotlight, wielding his Gandhian blueprint like a maestro, conducting a symphony of social change. But before you picture King as the main act, let's rewind to December 1, 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama. Enter Rosa Parks, the woman often mythologized as simply tired, when she refused to give up her bus seat. Oh, she was tired, all right, tired of the nonsense that was racial segregation. But this was no spur-of-the-moment decision. Parks was a seasoned activist, and her arrest was the catalyst that lit the fuse of the Montgomery bus boycott, a movement that would become a defining moment in the civil rights struggle. The cost of a bus fare back then, 10 cents, but the symbolic cost of Parks' defiance, priceless. As for the city of Montgomery, it faced an economic headache of epic proportions. The boycott, which lasted for 381 days, was not just a moral stance, but an economic siege. The Montgomery public transit system, reliant on black passengers for about 75% of its revenue, watched helplessly as its coffers ran dry. How dry, you ask? Try about $3,000 a day. Adjusted for inflation, that's around $30,000 daily. A financial gut punch that would make even the most stoic accountant wince. This wasn't just a battle of wills. It was an economic tug-of-war that the city was not remotely prepared for. Imagine trying to keep the lights on when your main revenue stream dries up faster than a puddle in the Alabama sun. The boycott's brilliance lay in its simplicity. No violence, no chaos, just a quiet, collective refusal to play by the rules of an unjust system. And this is where King steps into his role with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, not as a firebrand, but as the calm, articulate voice of reason the movement desperately needed. King, armed with his newfound fame, transformed into the de facto spokesperson for the boycott. His sermons, fueled by both theological passion and tactical genius, were like fuel to the fire. People listened, not just because he was saying something new, but because he was saying it with an urgency and clarity that cut through the noise like a hot knife through butter. Now, let's talk logistics. The city of Montgomery might have hoped the boycott would fizzle out like a damp squib, but instead, it became a masterclass in community coordination. Black residents organized carpools and even walked miles to work. Talk about commitment. Many local churches chipped in, buying station wagons that were dubbed rolling churches to ferry people around. It was ride-sharing before Uber made it cool, proving that necessity is indeed the mother of invention. Meanwhile, city officials scrambled to maintain the status quo. But it was like trying to patch a sinking ship with chewing gum. They tried intimidation, arresting carpool organizers, and even King himself, but the resolve of the boycott participants was as unyielding as granite. The stakes were high, and the world was watching. King's arrest on charges like conspiracy to interfere with a business only served to elevate his status from local preacher to national hero. Nothing rallies the public quite like an underdog story, and King was quickly becoming the face of a movement that was bigger than any one person. In this high-stakes chess match, the Montgomery government found itself in a precarious position, like a player down to their last pieces on the board. The city's attempts to quash the boycott only solidified the resolve of those involved. The economic repercussions were undeniable, and the socio-political impact was seismic. When the Supreme Court eventually ruled that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional, it wasn't just a legal victory, but a cultural one. Montgomery's buses, once rolling symbols of racial injustice, became rolling monuments to perseverance. And so, the Montgomery bus boycott didn't just catapult King into the national consciousness. It also set a precedent for non-violent protest and the power of collective action. It was a lesson in economics, sociology, and human rights all rolled into one, proving that when people unite for a common cause, they can move mountains, or at least a few buses. As for King, he emerged from Montgomery not just as a leader, but as a symbol of the power of peaceful resistance. His journey was far from over, but his path was now illuminated by the light of a community that refused to sit down and be silent. This chapter of history is often romanticized, and why not? It's a compelling narrative of courage and resilience. But let's not forget the harsh realities, the arrests, the economic strain, the daily grind of a prolonged boycott. It was a struggle fought on multiple fronts, and the victory was hard-won. Yet, through it all, King maintained his steadfast commitment to non-violence, a philosophy that would continue to shape the civil rights movement for years to come. As we pause to reflect on this pivotal moment, it's clear that the Montgomery bus boycott was not just a local skirmish, but a national turning point. It was proof that change is possible when people stand united, and it set the stage for the battles yet to come. Stay tuned, because the journey of Martin Luther King Jr. is far from over, and the road ahead is filled with challenges, triumphs, and a legacy that continues to inspire generations. As the dust settled on the Montgomery bus boycott, you might think the civil rights movement would take a breather, but you'd be sorely mistaken. Instead, the stage was set for another showdown, this time on a 54-mile stretch of Alabama highway between Selma and Montgomery. If the Montgomery bus boycott was a chess match, the Selma to Montgomery marches were more like a high-stakes poker game, with Martin Luther King Jr. and his allies betting big on a peaceful march to spotlight the fight for voting rights. Fast forward to early 1965 in Selma, a city with more cattle than civil rights. Despite making up over half of the population, black residents were largely shut out of the voter rolls, thanks to a gauntlet of discriminatory practices. You know, little things like literacy tests and poll taxes designed to keep the status quo firmly in place. Enter the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, ready to shuffle the deck. Now, let's talk strategy. The plan was to march from Selma to Montgomery, a route as symbolic as it was strategic. Why 54 miles? Because that's how long it took to get from the heart of racial oppression to the seat of power in Alabama, where Governor George Wallace, no friend to civil rights, sat entrenched. The goal, to petition Wallace and push President Lyndon B. Johnson to enact federal voting rights legislation. The stakes couldn't have been higher. As you might imagine, the powers that be were less than thrilled with the prospect of hundreds of protesters streaming into Montgomery. On March 7, 1965, about 600 brave souls set out from Selma, only to be met with a wall of Alabama state troopers at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. What happened next was both tragic and galvanizing. Dubbed Bloody Sunday, the marchers were brutally attacked with billy clubs and tear gas. It was as if the officials thought they could bludgeon away the tide of history with sheer force. A tactical move so misguided it was almost comical if it weren't so brutally tragic. The absurdity of using violence to suppress a non-violent march wasn't lost on anyone. News cameras captured the chaos, and the footage was broadcast nationwide, sharking viewers and sparking outrage. It's one of those moments where the power of the media truly came into its own, turning a local struggle into a national cause célèbre. Americans across the country, sipping their morning coffee, couldn't ignore the images of peaceful protesters being clubbed like an unwanted piñata at a birthday party. In the wake of Bloody Sunday, Martin Luther King Jr. issued a call to clergy and citizens to join him in Selma for another march, scheduled for March 9. This time, King led a contingent of about 2,000 marchers, including religious leaders from across the spectrum. But King, ever the strategic thinker, chose to pause the march at the site of the previous confrontation, kneeling to pray before turning back, a tactical retreat that avoided further violence while keeping the momentum alive. Into the federal government, stage left. President Johnson, feeling the heat from all sides, stepped in to provide federal protection for a third march scheduled for March 21. Now, this is where the rubber met the road. Over 3,000 marchers began the journey to Montgomery, growing to 25,000 by the time they reached the state capitol on March 25. It was a diverse coalition, black, white, young, old, marching in solidarity, proving that the struggle for civil rights was as inclusive as it was urgent. And here's the kicker. The march from Selma to Montgomery wasn't just a walk down a dusty highway. It was a seismic shift in the civil rights movement. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, signed into law by President Johnson on August 6, was a direct response to the events in Selma. The act banned the discriminatory voting practices that had long disenfranchised black Americans, opening the ballot box to millions. Talk about a return on investment for those blistered feet and determined souls. But let's not sugarcoat it. The road to Montgomery was littered with challenges, both literal and figurative. Marchers faced the elements, hostile locals, and the ever-present threat of violence. Yet, their resolve was as unyielding as the Alabama sun. It's easy to romanticize these marches as a straightforward path to victory, but the reality was a complex tapestry of courage, sacrifice, and tactical brilliance. The marchers weren't just walking toward Montgomery, they were marching into history. In the end, the Selma to Montgomery march wasn't just about reaching a destination. It was about making a statement. It was a testament to the power of collective action and the indomitable human spirit. The absurdity of trying to stop a movement with billy clubs and tear gas only highlighted the desperation of those clinging to an unjust past. The marchers knew the risks, yet they pressed on, driven by a vision of a future where equality wasn't just a dream but a promise. So, as the marchers filed into Montgomery, they carried with them the hopes of a nation. The road from Selma may have been long and arduous, but it was paved with resolve and determination. And as history would show, their journey didn't end at the Alabama state capitol. It was just beginning. The march from Selma to Montgomery was more than a milestone. It was a beacon of hope, lighting the way for future generations in the ongoing quest for justice and equality. Stay tuned, because the story of Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement is far from over, and the next chapters promise to be just as riveting. As the marchers made their way to Montgomery, their footsteps echoing with the promise of change, another chapter of the civil rights movement was quietly unfolding, a chapter that would crescendo on a sweltering August day in Washington, D.C. Cue the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. It's often remembered for Martin Luther King Jr.'s electrifying "I have a dream" speech. But let's peel back the layers of this historical onion to see what really went down. For starters, the event wasn't a spur-of-the-moment gathering of peace-loving idealists spontaneously converging on the National Mall. No, this was a meticulously planned affair, a logistical ballet that would have made even a Swiss watchmaker nod in approval. Pulling off an event of this magnitude required more than just hope and good intentions. It demanded the kind of coordination you'd expect from a military operation. Organized by a coalition of civil rights, labor, and religious organizations, the march was the brainchild of leaders like Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin. These guys were the real MVPs, orchestrating everything from transportation logistics to crowd control. And let's not forget the funding. Money doesn't just magically appear. The organizers had to hustle to secure enough dollars to make the event a reality. We're talking about a budget that soared into the hundreds of thousands, adjusted for today's inflation, of course. Now, let's talk numbers. Over 250,000 people, yes, you heard that right, descended upon the Capitol. To put that in perspective, that's like filling up 5 baseball stadiums. It was one of the largest political rallies for human rights in U.S. history. And while the event was a peaceful demonstration, the stakes were sky high. This wasn't just a feel-good gathering, but a calculated move to pressure Congress and the Kennedy administration to pass meaningful civil rights legislation. Speaking of pressure, the political climate was harder than a jalapeno in a sauna. The country was a tinderbox of racial tension, and the march was as much about economic rights as it was about ending segregation. The unemployment rate for black Americans was double that of their white counterparts, and the median income was a gut-punching 55% less. So, when folks gathered in Washington, they weren't just dreaming of racial harmony. They were demanding equitable jobs and fair wages. And then there was King's speech, the piece de resistance of the day. Delivered from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, the speech was a masterclass in oratory. But here's the kicker. The iconic "I Have a Dream" segment wasn't even in the original script. King, in a moment of inspired improvisation, ditched his prepared remarks, prompted by his friend Mahalia Jackson's cry from behind him, urging him to tell them about the dream. It was a gamble that paid off, turning a powerful speech into an unforgettable moment in history. Despite the soaring rhetoric, the day wasn't without its hiccups. The sound system, for one, was a hot mess. You'd think they were trying to transmit King's words through 2 tin cans and a string. The crowd, stretching from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument, often struggled to hear. But the message, crystal clear. King's dream resonated then and continues to echo now, a testament to the enduring power of hope and resilience. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with the day's events. Some political leaders were skeptical, fearing the march would devolve into chaos. President Kennedy himself had his reservations, though the peaceful execution of the event did much to allay his concerns. In fact, the march is credited with bolstering support for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which, among other things, aimed to dismantle the discriminatory practices that had long shackled black Americans. Yet, let's not sugarcoat it. The march was a monumental achievement, but it was also a reminder of the immense work left to be done. King's dream wasn't a one-and-done deal. It was a call to action, a blueprint for a fairer, more just society. The road to achieving that dream was, and remains, fraught with obstacles and setbacks. But the march itself was a turning point, a moment when the disparate threads of the civil rights movement came together in a tapestry of unity and resolve. So, as we leave the National Mall, let's take a moment to appreciate the complexity of this historic gathering. It wasn't just a march. It was a movement, a rallying cry for change that reverberated across the nation. And while King's words continue to inspire, they also challenge us to confront the realities of inequality and injustice in our own time. Stay tuned, because the story of Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement doesn't end here. The journey continues, with more battles to fight and victories to win. The dream isn't just a relic of the past. It's a living, breathing testament to the power of collective action and the enduring human spirit. But even as Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream resounded across the nation, the reality was that the man himself was far from the end of his journey. Fast forward a few years, and King found himself navigating increasingly turbulent waters. By the mid-1960s, the civil rights movement had achieved significant victories, yet King's focus was expanding. He was now setting his sights on the broader issues plaguing America, issues like poverty and the Vietnam War, which was consuming more resources and lives than anyone had anticipated. Imagine trying to juggle a career-defining legacy while also attempting to solve the nation's economic and moral crises. It was as though King was playing a game of whack-a-mole, but with far higher stakes. In 1967, King launched the Poor People's Campaign, a bold initiative aimed at addressing economic injustice and demanding better jobs, fair wages, and improved housing for America's poor, regardless of race. The goal was to assemble a multiracial coalition that would march on Washington once again. this time not just for civil rights, but for what King called economic rights. Because, let's face it, what good is the right to vote if you can't afford to get to the polls because gas prices are through the roof? This campaign was a tall order, and not everyone in the movement was on board. Critics within his own camp worried that King was stretching himself too thin, much like a college student trying to cram for finals in a dozen subjects at once. And then there was the Vietnam War, an albatross around the neck of American politics. King had been a vocal critic, calling the war a demonic destructive suction tube that siphoned resources away from domestic issues. Yet his outspokenness on Vietnam was a double-edged sword. It alienated some of his allies, who feared that anti-war activism would overshadow the civil rights agenda. Even President Lyndon B. Johnson, once a supporter of King's civil rights efforts, found himself at odds with King over his stance on the war. It was a classic case of being caught between a rock and a hard place, or in this case, between racial justice and political pragmatism. Despite these challenges, King pressed on, driven by a vision that refused to be boxed in by conventional boundaries. He took his message to the streets, the pulpit, and beyond, speaking out against systemic ills at rallies, protests, and even at the United Nations. However, as his focus widened, so did the threats against him. King's life was under constant surveillance by the FBI, which saw him as a threat to national security. J. Edgar Hoover, the Bureau's director, went so far as to label King the most dangerous Negro in America, as if his message of peace and equality could somehow topple the nation like a poorly balanced Jenga tower. And then, as if the universe itself were conspiring against him, 1968 arrived like an unwelcome guest. On April 4, King was in Memphis, Tennessee, supporting striking sanitation workers who were fighting for better wages and safer working conditions. The workers' plight was emblematic of the very economic injustices King sought to address, and he had come to lend his voice to their cause. But that evening, as he stood on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, a single shot rang out, ending his life at just 39 years old. It was a cruel twist of fate, and the world was left to grapple with the loss of a man who had dedicated his life to the pursuit of justice and equality. In the wake of King's assassination, the nation erupted in grief and rage. Over 100 American cities experienced riots, a testament to the deep-seated frustrations simmering below the surface. King's death was a seismic event, shaking the very foundations of the civil rights movement. It was as though the nation had lost its moral compass, and the path forward seemed shrouded in uncertainty. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, King's message endured, a beacon of hope for those who refused to give up the fight for a better tomorrow. So what of King's legacy? It's a complex tapestry of triumphs and setbacks, of dreams realized and deferred. On one hand, he is venerated as a saint-like figure, a martyr for civil rights whose words continue to inspire generations. But let's not gloss over the gritty reality. King was a man, not a myth, and his work was as much about navigating the messy, often ugly landscape of American politics as it was about delivering soaring speeches. He was a strategist, a tactician, and yes, sometimes a controversial figure, even within his own movement. And then there's the question of how his vision has been co-opted in modern times. King's dream of a colorblind society is often invoked in political debates, sometimes by those who oppose the very principles he championed. His words are cherry-picked, sanitized, and repackaged in a way that often strips them of their radical edge. It's as if some folks are trying to fit his message into a neat little box labeled feel-good history, ignoring the fact that King was as much about challenging the status quo as he was about dreaming. Yet, despite these attempts to dilute his legacy, King's impact remains undeniable. The civil rights movement he helped spearhead set the stage for subsequent struggles for equality, from women's rights to LGBTQ+ advocacy. His insistence on nonviolent protest has influenced countless movements worldwide, proving that the pen, or in this case, the megaphone, is mightier than the sword. And while the path to equality is far from finished, King's vision continues to light the way for those who dare to dream of a more just world. So, as we wrap up this exploration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life and legacy, let's remember him not just as a dreamer, but as a doer, a man who understood the power of words but also the necessity of action. His legacy is a call to arms for each of us to continue the fight for justice and equality, to challenge the narratives that seek to divide us, and to dream of a world where freedom and opportunity are truly within reach for all. Because in the end, King's dream was not just his own. It was a vision for a better future that belongs to us all. Julius Caesar wasn't born with a laurel wreath on his head or a toga draped over his shoulders. Nope, he came into this chaotic world in July 100 BCE, part of the Julii family, a patrician lineage that had seen better days. Now, patrician sounds fancy, doesn't it? Like they had golden statues of themselves in the hallway. But by the time little Julius made his grand entrance, the Julii were more like Rome's version of yesterday's news. They had the pedigree, sure, but not the power. Growing up in the vibrant yet dangerous streets of Rome was no walk in the Forum. Julius, like any Roman boy worth his salt, was expected to learn how to speak, fight, and navigate the treacherous social waters of the late Republic. The political climate of the time was as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Rome was a republic in name, but in reality it was a hotbed of corruption, backstabbing, and power grabs. Perfect training grounds for a future dictator, wouldn't you say? But before Julius could strut his stuff in the political circus, he had to survive his childhood. And that wasn't guaranteed back then. Disease, social unrest, or a poorly timed political purge could easily make a young Roman history. Speaking of purges, in 85 BCE, when Julius was just a teenager, his father died unexpectedly. This left him as the head of the family, a title he probably took with the same enthusiasm a cat takes to water. To make matters even more spicy, Rome was in the throes of a civil war between the Optimates, the conservative faction led by Lucius Cornelius Sulla, and the Populares, the more populist group to which Caesar's uncle Marius belonged. Bad timing for family gatherings, wouldn't you agree? When Sulla emerged victoriously, he launched a bloody purge against his enemies. Young Caesar, by virtue of his family ties, found himself on the wrong side of Sulla's good graces. But here's where things get interesting. Instead of taking a trip to the underworld, Caesar used his teenage charm, or maybe just some well-placed bribes, to avoid Sulla's wrath. And thus begins the tale of a man who could talk his way out of imminent demise. Once Sulla kicked the bucket, natural causes, if you can believe it, Caesar's fortunes took a turn for the better. He began his career in the military, because what better way to escape political peril than by diving headfirst into a battlefield? In 81 BCE, Caesar served under Marcus Minucius Thermus in Asia Minor, where he won the civic crown, a military honor given for saving a fellow soldier's life. Imagine Caesar, chest puffed out, wearing a crown of leaves like he was auditioning for a Roman production of Nature's headgear. But Caesar's military adventures were just getting started. Picture this. It's 75 BCE, and Julius is on a ship to Rhodes to study oratory, a skill that would soon make him the most persuasive voice in Rome. Pirates, however, had other plans. They captured him near the island of Pharmacusa, and here's where it gets wild. They demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver, roughly $600,000 today. Caesar, never one to be outdone, laughed in their faces and insisted they ask for 50 talents instead. Talk about knowing your worth. For 38 days, Caesar was their guest, and he treated the pirates more like an audience than captors, reading them poetry and joining in their games. But as soon as he was ransomed and released, he raised a fleet, captured the pirates, and had them crucified, though he did mercifully slit their throats first, a gesture of Roman kindness, if you will. Back in Rome, Caesar's political ascent picked up speed. He climbed the cursus honorum, the sequential order of public offices held by aspiring politicians. He started as a military tribune, then moved on to quaestor in Spain, and by 63 BCE, he was elected Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of the Roman state religion. It was a position of immense influence, and Caesar snatched it with the kind of deft political maneuvering that would make Machiavelli blush. While all this was happening, Rome was becoming a powder keg ready to explode. The Republic was in decline, and the Senate was about as effective as a chocolate teapot. Enter Caesar, who had a knack for forging alliances. He teamed up with Pompey and Crassus to form the first triumvirate, a political alliance that was as shaky as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. But for a while, it worked. The trio played off each other's strengths, with Caesar providing the military prowess, Pompey the popularity, and Crassus the cash. Yet even as he navigated these alliances, Caesar's ambition was unmistakable. He wasn't just interested in being a cog in the Roman machine. He was eyeing the whole shebang, and with each step, he moved closer to the Rubicon, both literally and metaphorically. But that's a tale for another time. For now, let's just say young Julius had set the stage for a career that would redefine power, politics, and pasta sauces forever. So, young Julius was on a roll. Having waltzed through the first few rungs of the cursus honorum like a Roman on a mission, he was now ready to up the ante. It was 65 BCE, and Caesar had his eyes set on the office of aedile, an ancient Roman role that was part event planner, part public works director, and part entertainer. Think of it as a cross between a mayor and a Vegas casino manager, minus the neon lights, but with all the spectacle. Being an aedile wasn't just about fixing potholes or making sure the public baths were clean. No, it was about winning the hearts and minds of the Roman citizens, and there was no better way to do that than through games and festivals. Caesar knew this all too well. With the flair of a Hollywood producer, he organized lavish gladiatorial games and public feasts that had the whole of Rome abuzz. He threw games that were so extravagant, they probably had the bean counters at the Roman treasury reaching for their laudanum. But these weren't just any games. We're talking 320 pairs of gladiators fighting to the death in the arena. It was the Roman equivalent of binge-watching the latest blockbuster trilogy, complete with blood, drama, and a dash of showmanship. The people loved it, and Caesar, like a maestro conducting an orchestra, soaked up the adulation like a sponge. Of course, this wasn't just for fun. It was all part of a cunning plan to cement his popularity. Now, let's not forget that all this grandeur came with a price tag that would make a Wall Street banker blush. Caesar was spending money like it was going out of fashion, and by the end of his tenure as aedile, he had racked up debts that would make the national deficit of a small country seem like pocket change. We're talking millions of sesterces, an amount so staggering that his creditors probably had to sit down and take a long sip of wine every time they checked their ledgers. But Caesar wasn't worried. He was playing the long game, and he had allies in high places. Enter Marcus Licinius Crassus, the Roman tycoon with a bank account that rivaled the wealth of Croesus. Crassus was the kind of guy who could bankroll a small army without breaking a sweat, and for reasons that probably involved equal parts admiration and ambition, he decided to back Caesar. With Crassus' wealth and Pompey's military clout, Caesar was poised to form the first triumvirate, a political alliance that would redefine power in Rome. This trio wasn't exactly the Three Musketeers. Their alliance was more of a marriage of convenience, with each member bringing something to the table. Pompey had the soldiers, Crassus had the cash, and Caesar had the charisma and cunning to make it all work. It was a delicate balancing act, like juggling flaming torches on a tightrope, but Caesar was a natural. He played Crassus and Pompey off each other like a seasoned diplomat, ensuring that their interests aligned just enough to keep the alliance afloat. Of course, the Roman Senate wasn't thrilled about this unholy trinity. They saw the triumvirate as a threat to the Republic, and they weren't wrong. The Senate was about as effective as a paper shield in a sword fight, and this new power block was poised to sideline them entirely. But Caesar wasn't too concerned about senatorial grumblings. He had bigger fish to fry, like his future governorship in Gaul, a position that would give him the military command he needed to truly make waves. And while all this political maneuvering was happening, Caesar was also Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome. In this role, he wasn't just overseeing religious ceremonies. He was ensuring that the gods, or at least the perception of divine favor, were on his side. Religion and politics were intertwined like vines on a trellis in ancient Rome, and Caesar knew how to use that to his advantage. Yet, even as Caesar climbed higher up the political ladder, he was acutely aware of the precariousness of his position. His debts were a constant shadow, and his political enemies were as numerous as the stars in the Roman night sky. But Caesar was nothing if not resourceful. He had an uncanny ability to turn potential disasters into opportunities, whether it was through charm, cunning, or sheer force of will. And so, with his debts mounting and his alliances forged in the fires of ambition, Caesar was ready to take the next step in his meteoric rise. He was a man on a mission, and nothing, not even the vast expanse of Gaul or the machinations of the Roman Senate, could stand in his way. The Rubicon was still a distant crossing, but Caesar was already setting the stage for the most dramatic act of his life. Stay tuned, because the story of Julius Caesar was only just beginning to unfold. And so, with debts shadowing him like an overzealous creditor and alliances forged in ambition's crucible, Caesar stood at the precipice of his greatest adventure yet, the conquest of Gaul. Ah, Gaul, an expanse so vast and tumultuous it made the Italian peninsula look like a tranquil villa garden. This wasn't just a military campaign. It was Caesar's grand stage to dazzle Rome and secure his place among the stars. But before you get swept away by visions of a noble hero conquering barbarian lands, let's dive into the gritty reality of what Caesar's Gallic Wars really entailed. For starters, Julius Caesar wasn't simply a military genius who whimsically decided to expand Roman borders. No, he was a man driven by the practicalities of power and the allure of wealth. The Gallic Wars, which lasted from 58 BCE to 50 BCE, were as much a testament to his strategic acumen as they were to his financial desperation. Remember, Caesar wasn't just trying to win battles. He was trying to dig himself out of a financial hole deeper than the Mariana Trench. Each conquered village, each captured town, was a potential treasure trove of spoils that could help Caesar pay off those pesky creditors back in Rome. Now, let's talk about Caesar's so-called invincibility. The myth of Caesar as an unstoppable military force is as enticing as the idea of a chocolate fountain that never runs dry. But let's set the record straight. He wasn't immune to failure. Sure, Caesar was a brilliant strategist who knew how to play the long game, like a chess grandmaster eyeing the board. His victory at the Battle of Alesia in 52 BCE, where he outmaneuvered the Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix, is often touted as a masterpiece of military strategy. Caesar encircled the Gallic forces with a double ring of fortifications, trapping them like a fox in a henhouse. Yet, for every Alesia, there were also moments of doubt and near disaster, like at the Battle of Gergovia, where Caesar suffered a rare defeat that bruised his ego more than a gladiator's punch. Caesar's campaigns left a trail of destruction across Gaul that would make Attila the Hun blush. His legions razed towns, enslaved entire populations, and slaughtered those who resisted. It was less about spreading Roman civilization and more about sending a message. Defy Rome, and you'll meet the business end of a gladius. By the end of the Gallic Wars, Caesar claimed to have killed over 1 million Gauls, though historians debate these numbers with the same fervor as a heated political debate. Was he exaggerating? Quite possibly. But the devastation was very real. The Gallic Wars weren't just geopolitical chess. They were a brutal exercise in power projection. Of course, there was more to Gaul than just swords and sandals. The economic incentives were as tempting as a Roman feast. Gaul was rich in natural resources, with fertile lands and plenty of manpower ready to be exploited in the name of Rome. Every victory meant more land and wealth for the Roman state, and more importantly, for Caesar himself. His troops, handsomely rewarded with spoils, were as loyal as hounds to their master. Caesar understood that a well-fed soldier was a happy soldier, and a happy soldier was less likely to stab you in the back. And then there's the famous dispatch. Veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. It sounds like the tagline of an action hero, doesn't it? But the truth is, this phrase wasn't even about Gaul. It was penned after a swift victory at the Battle of Zela in 47 BCE against Pharnaces' Roman II of Pontus, a minor skirmish compared to the epic struggle in Gaul. Still, it encapsulates Caesar's knack for self-promotion. This wasn't just military genius, it was brand building at its finest. Caesar knew that catchy slogans could spread faster than wildfire, and he used them to cement his image as Rome's premier conqueror. Now, let's not ignore the political machinations that made all this possible. Back in the Roman Senate, Caesar's enemies were sharpening their knives. Figuratively, of course. They saw his growing power and wealth as a threat to the Republic, which, let's be honest, was already about as stable as an overturned chariot. Yet Caesar had allies in high places, and his successes in Gaul only bolstered his standing. He was the golden boy of Rome, a man who could seemingly do no wrong, at least until he did. So, as Caesar carved his name into the annals of history with a sword and a bit of strategic flair, he was also setting the stage for his eventual showdown with Pompey and the Roman Senate. The Rubicon was still a future leap, But Caesar was inching ever closer to the point of no return. His military career in Gaul wasn't just an exercise in conquest. It was a prelude to the political storm that would soon engulf the Roman world. But that's a tale for another time. For now, know that Caesar's legacy was built on both the blood-soaked fields of Gaul and the glittering streets of Rome. And as any good Roman would tell you, both were equally necessary for greatness. As Caesar's victories in Gaul echoed through the Roman world like a clarion call, he was greeted by a very different kind of fanfare back home. Political landmines, and a Senate that was sharpening its collective daggers. The once solid first triumvirate had crumbled into a heap of mutual distrust and ambition. Pompey, once Caesar's ally, was now the darling of the Senate, a Senate that was about as welcoming to Caesar's ambitions as a cold Roman winter to a toga-clad tourist. The breakdown of this alliance wasn't just a petty squabble. It was a seismic shift, with Crassus having met his end in a less than glorious fashion during the ill-fated Parthian campaign in 53 BCE. Think gold melted and poured down his throat as a final farewell. The balance of power had tipped precariously. Pompey, the Senate's new golden boy, had shed his previous camaraderie with Caesar faster than a Roman senator could shout, "Veto." Now, if you think Caesar was about to slink back into obscurity, think again. He was far too seasoned a player to fold when the stakes were this high. After all, this was a man who could charm pirates into raising their ransom demands. Caesar's response to the Senate's hostility was as audacious as it was calculated. He wanted to run for consul in absentia. That's right. He aimed to leapfrog the traditional political hurdles without even setting foot in Rome. But the Senate wasn't having it. They demanded he disband his army before entering the city, essentially stripping him of the very power that had made him a force to reckon with. It was a classic catch-22. Lay down his arms and risk prosecution for whatever trumped-up charges his enemies could concoct, or march on Rome and declare open season on the Republic. Caesar, never one to enjoy a lack of options, chose the latter. And then came that fateful moment in January of 49 BCE. The Rubicon River, a geographical footnote that suddenly found itself at the heart of history. Crossing it was more than just a physical act. It was Caesar's declaration of war, not just on Pompey, but on the entire Roman status quo. The phrase alia iacta est, the die is cast, wasn't just a snappy line for the history books. It was Caesar's call to arms, a bold gamble with the highest of stakes, his life and legacy on the line. Now, let's not romanticize this as some solitary heroes leap into destiny. Sure, it's tempting to picture Caesar as a lone wolf striding boldly into history, but reality paints a more pragmatic picture. This wasn't just about personal glory, it was about survival. The Senate, with Pompey as its figurehead, was a looming threat, ready to pounce the moment Caesar showed weakness. Crossing the Rubicon was less a charge of destiny, and more a carefully calculated risk to avoid becoming another victim of Rome's ruthless political purges. The legal implications of this act were monumental. By crossing the river with his army, Caesar shattered the age-old Roman law that forbade generals from bringing troops into Italy. It was an act of treason, clear as the Tiber on a sunny day. But Caesar, ever the master of spin, framed it as a fight for justice and reform. The Senate, he claimed, was a corrupt oligarchy that had lost touch with the people. Sound familiar? Politicians blaming the establishment is a tale as old as democracy itself. Yet, even as Caesar's legions marched south, he was acutely aware of the precarious tightrope he was walking. He needed to secure key cities, win over the populace, and most importantly, avoid open battle with Pompey, whose forces outnumbered his own. This was no easy task. Pompey wasn't just sitting around sipping vino and waiting for Caesar to show up. He was assembling an army of his own, gathering the Senate's support like a political magpie collecting shiny endorsements. In a twist of irony, Caesar's march on Rome was more of a saunter, as he cleverly avoided direct confrontation, instead focusing on cutting off Pompey's supply lines and winning the hearts and minds of local communities. It was a campaign of persuasion as much as it was one of power, an exercise in political finesse that would make any modern spin doctor proud. It's important to note that Caesar wasn't universally loved. Sure, he had his fair share of supporters, but many Romans viewed his actions as the ultimate betrayal of republican values. To them, he was less a hero and more a tyrant in the making, a wolf in populist clothing. The Senate, once a symbol of Roman virtue, was now embroiled in a civil war that threatened to tear the Republic apart. As the political chess game unfolded, Caesar's momentum seemed unstoppable. By March of 49 BCE, he had secured Rome without a single sword being drawn in the city. Pompey and the Senate had fled to Greece, regrouping and licking their wounds, while Caesar established control over the Italian peninsula. The Senate's flight was as much a strategic retreat as it was a desperate bid to avoid Caesar's advancing legions. But don't mistake this for a simple victory parade. Caesar's hold on power was as tenuous as a Roman aqueduct over shifting sands. He still had to face Pompey's considerable forces across the sea, a showdown that promised to be as epic as a gladiatorial battle in the Colosseum. So, as Caesar stood on the brink of yet another campaign, the stakes had never been higher. The Rubicon had been crossed, both literally and figuratively, and there was no turning back. The Republic was in chaos, and the world watched as these two titans of Roman history prepared to clash. Would Caesar emerge as Rome's ultimate ruler, or would he become another cautionary tale of ambition gone awry? Stay tuned, because the story of Caesar's rise and fall is far from over. And so, with the Rubicon behind him and Rome under his sandal-clad feet, Caesar had swiftly found himself not just at the center of a civil war, but as the eye of a storm that would reshape the world. Yet, if you think Caesar was just going to sit back with a goblet of wine and let events unfold, you'd be as misguided as a toga at a toga-less party. He was nothing if not a man of action, and the next few years would see him embroiled in battles, both on the battlefield and within the halls of power. First up, the showdown with Pompey. The Senate's favorite son had retreated to Greece, gathering forces like a hurricane picking up steam. By 48 BCE, the stage was set for a clash of titans at the Battle of Pharsalus. Caesar, always the underdog in terms of numbers, had about 22,000 men to Pompey's 45,000. Not exactly a fair fight, but then again, Caesar was never one to play by the rules. He outmaneuvered Pompey with tactics as sharp as a Roman short sword, leading to a decisive victory that sent Pompey fleeing to Egypt. There, in a twist of fate worthy of a Greek tragedy, Pompey met his end at the hands of a pharaoh's court, his head served up to Caesar as a macabre gift. Caesar was reportedly unimpressed. After all, he had come for a fight, not a funeral. With Pompey out of the picture, Caesar turned his attention to consolidating power. He was declared dictator in perpetuity by 44 BCE, a title that sounds as benevolent as a warm Roman bath, but carried the weight of absolute power. Now, the term dictator in Rome didn't have the same sinister ring it does today. Originally, it was a temporary position, meant for emergencies, like when the Gauls were at the gates, and not as a personal monarchy. But Caesar's version was less about temporary measures and more about permanent change. Now, let's talk reforms. Caesar's reforms were a mixed bag of the practical and the populist, the kind of policies that could inspire both admiration and animosity. He tackled debt, a problem as ancient as Rome itself, by enacting laws that relieved citizens of crippling financial burdens. He also reformed the calendar, giving us the Julian calendar, a time-reckoning system that, let's be honest, we all owe our organized lives to today. He expanded the Senate, granting citizenship to many in the provinces, which was less about inclusivity and more about ensuring loyalty. But not all were thrilled with his initiatives. The Senate, already feeling sidelined, saw these changes as a threat to their power, as if Caesar was rearranging the furniture without asking the homeowner. Caesar, ever the pragmatist, also knew the value of bread and circuses. He distributed grain to the poor, staged grand spectacles, and made sure that Rome's citizens were entertained and fed, at least enough to keep them from revolting. Some saw him as a champion of the people, others as a leader who pandered to the mob. Love him or loathe him, Caesar had a knack for keeping the populace on his side, a skill more valuable than any military victory. Yet, for all his political savvy, Caesar was no stranger to controversy. His affair with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, was the talk of the town, or rather, the entire empire. Cleopatra was more than just a lover. She was a political ally, a strategic partner who bore him a son, Caesarion. This alliance with Egypt was as much about love as it was about power. a bid to secure Rome's grain supply and strengthen Caesar's hand in the east. But in Rome, it only fueled the gossip mill, painting Caesar as a man who was both a Roman general and a foreign king. And then there was the issue of his ambition. Caesar's refusal to lay down his power, even when offered a ceremonial crown by Mark Antony, was a move that smacked of monarchy, a concept that was about as welcome in Republican Rome as a Carthaginian elephant in a china shop. The Ides of March, 44 BCE, was not just a date on the calendar, but a prelude to the ultimate betrayal. 60 senators, fearing Caesar's growing power, conspired to end his life. Brutus, Cassius, and others saw themselves not as assassins, but as liberators, striking down a tyrant to save the Republic. On that fateful day, Caesar entered the Senate and was met with a flurry of daggers. It said his last words were "Et tu, Brute," a phrase as debated as it is legendary. Whether he uttered those words or not, the sentiment was clear. Betrayal from a trusted ally hit harder than any blade. Caesar fell at the base of Pompey's statue, a final irony in the drama of his life. In the aftermath, Rome was plunged into chaos, and the conspirators, far from being hailed as saviors, found themselves on the run. The Republic they sought to save was already in its death throes, and Caesar's assassination only hastened its demise. The power vacuum left by Caesar's death led to civil wars, power struggles, and ultimately the rise of his heir, Octavian, later known as Augustus, the first Roman emperor. The Republic was dead, and in its place stood the Roman Empire, a testament to Caesar's lasting impact. Caesar's legacy is a tapestry of contradictions. He was a dictator who reformed, a conqueror who built, a lover who strategized. His life and death mark the end of the Roman Republic and the dawn of an empire. His crossing of the Rubicon remains a metaphor for irreversible decisions, and his name, Caesar, became synonymous with power, echoing through history as Tsar and Kaiser. His story is a testament to ambition's double-edged sword, a reminder that the path to greatness is often paved with both triumph and tragedy. So, as we reflect on Julius Caesar's life, we see a man who reshaped history, not just through military might, but through sheer will, charisma, and a touch of audacity. His tale is one of ambition, betrayal, and legacy, a story as relevant today as it was over 2 millennia ago. And while the Rome he knew may have fallen, the echoes of his actions continue to reverberate through the corridors of time. As you lay down to rest, let the lessons of Caesar's rise and fall serve as a reminder. The road to power is as treacherous as it is rewarding, and in the end, we are all but actors on history's stage. In the grand tapestry of history, medieval castles stand out like hulking stone behemoths. But don't let their rugged exteriors fool you. These fortresses were more than just the medieval version of a gated community for the wealthy and paranoid. Sure, they had all the charm of a Cold War bunker, but their design was a masterclass in blending form with the kind of function that makes you glad you weren't a 12th century bricklayer. Let's kick things off with the cold, hard cash of it all. Constructing a castle wasn't just a matter of piling up some stones and calling it a day. It was an endeavor that could rival any modern real estate nightmare. The cost of building a castle back in the day, think in the ballpark of 1,000 to 3,000 pounds, which might not sound like much until you realize that a single pound was equivalent to a skilled worker's annual salary. To put this into perspective, if medieval lords had access to crowdfunding platforms, their campaigns might have read something like, "Help me build my impenetrable fortress. Generous donors will receive a heartfelt thank you and maybe a spot in the dungeon." Now, let's talk logistics. Building a castle required not just money, but an army of workers. Imagine this. Hundreds of laborers, masons, and carpenters, all working tirelessly, some probably wondering if they'd ever see their families again. The construction could take anywhere from 5 to 10 years, a timeline not too far off from your average kitchen remodel. And they weren't just tossing stones around willy-nilly. The project required meticulous planning. Some castles, like the formidable Dover Castle, were situated atop cliffs and required the kind of engineering that would make even a modern-day architect sweat through their hard hat. But why go through all this trouble? Beyond serving as a medieval status symbol, castles were the ultimate defensive structures. These fortresses laugh in the face of luxury and say, "Not today, invaders." You see, Medieval Europe wasn't exactly a peaceful neighborhood. There were no friendly bake-offs or community picnics, just the looming threat of neighboring lords with questionable intentions. Castles were essentially the medieval version of a no-solicitors sign, but with added murder holes and arrow slits. Ah, murder holes. Here's where the fun begins. These charming openings in the floors of the entrance passage were designed for dropping unpleasant surprises on unwelcome visitors. Think boiling oil, quicklime, or rocks, whatever was lying around. It's a bit like Home Alone, but with less Kevin McAllister and more, let's ensure they never bother us again. And those arrow slits, the narrow vertical openings in the walls allowed archers to rain down arrows on attackers while staying largely protected. It's like those old drive-through windows, but with less convenience and more impending doom. And let's not forget the drawbridges and moats, the medieval version of a keep off the grass sign, but far less subtle. The moat served as both a literal and metaphorical barrier, daring attackers to try their luck against the elements, disease-ridden water, and the occasional crocodile that might have been tossed in for good measure if you were feeling particularly inhospitable. Despite the romantic image of castles as luxurious palaces, life inside was anything but. The stone walls were great for keeping enemies out, but they also excelled at keeping the cold in. Heating a castle was about as effective as trying to warm your house with a single matchstick. Tapestries and fireplaces did their best, but let's be honest, unless you were huddled right by the fire, you'd be better off wearing your entire wardrobe at once. So, while it's easy to get swept up in the allure of turrets and moats, the reality of castle life was a bit more down to earth, or rather, up to your ankles in mud. These architectural marvels were the epicenters of power, defense, and the occasional draft. They were as much about practicality as they were about projecting strength and influence. And while they might not have been the lap of luxury, they were certainly the lap of strategic genius. Castles weren't just built to last. They were built to endure, defy, and if necessary, outlast any siege. But that's a tale for another day. Now that we've established castles as the medieval version of Fort Knox meets Jurassic Park, let's swing open the grand doors and meet the lords and ladies who called these stone fortresses home. These aristocrats weren't just lounging around in velvet robes all day, sipping mead and twiddling their jeweled thumbs. Oh no, life was far more complex, filled with political chess games and the kind of daily drama that would make any reality TV producer salivate. First off, let's clear up the misconception that being a lord or lady was akin to living in a perpetual Renaissance fair. Sure, there were extravagant feasts with more courses than you could shake a turkey leg at, but these folks were also the CEOs of their time. The economic engine of a medieval estate was land ownership, the medieval equivalent of holding a diversified stock portfolio. Land wasn't just about having a nice view. It was the source of wealth, power, and influence. The more land you owned, the more peasants you had working it. And let's face it, nothing says I'm in charge like a legion of serfs tending your fields. Speaking of serfs, let's talk about feudal obligations. These were the not-so-fun strings attached to land ownership. It's like getting a free trial, but knowing you'll be charged later in blood, sweat, and possibly a bit of rebellion. Lords were expected to provide protection and justice to their vassals, who in return offered military service and a good chunk of their harvest. It was a medieval quid pro quo, minus the Latin. But managing this intricate web of obligations wasn't for the faint of heart. Imagine keeping track of all these transactions without the luxury of spreadsheets or a team of accountants. Instead, lords had stewards or bailiffs, essentially the CFOs of the castle, who handled the nitty-gritty of estate management. This included everything from collecting taxes, often in kind, like grain or livestock, to dealing with the occasional peasant revolt. Because yes, sometimes the people at the bottom of the pyramid got a little tired of being the base. Now, let's not forget the ladies of the castle. While popular culture often relegates them to the role of the damsel in distress, the truth is much more nuanced. These women were often tasked with managing the household, a job that was less about fluffing pillows and more about overseeing a small army of servants and ensuring the castle ran like a well-oiled machine. They were responsible for everything from food supplies to textiles, a role that required sharp management skills and a knack for diplomacy. After all, keeping the kitchen staff and the laundry crew happy could be the difference between a harmonious household and a culinary mutiny. And then there were the feasts. Ah, the medieval feast, a veritable smorgasbord of gluttony that could put a Vegas buffet to shame. These events were as much about political maneuvering as they were about culinary indulgence. Each dish, from the humble partridge to the more lavish roasted swan, was a statement of wealth and power. The dining hall was the boardroom of the medieval world, where alliances were forged over goblets of spiced wine and disputes were settled with a well-timed toast. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality was that these feasts often involved the consumption of dubious meats and equally questionable hygiene practices. Picture this, a hall filled with the mingling aromas of roasted meats, sweat, and the occasional waft of chamber pots. Oh, and the cutlery, mostly non-existent. Diners used their fingers, or, if they were fancy, a communal knife. Forget about forks. Their debut was still a few centuries away. Despite the glitz of these gatherings, the day-to-day grind of managing a household was anything but glamorous. It involved endless inventories, constant repairs, because stone walls, while sturdy, weren't immune to leaks, and the ever-present threat of running out of the two medieval essentials, beer and firewood. These challenges required a level of multitasking that would put any modern-day project manager to shame. Politically, the life of a lord or lady was a perpetual balancing act. They had to navigate the shifting allegiances of the nobility, keeping one eye on their own interests and the other on the king's whims. Loyalty could be as fleeting as a medieval summer, and one misstep could lead to losing land, titles, or worse, your head. This wasn't just Game of Thrones. This was the reality of maintaining power in a world where betrayal was as common as a rainy day in England. But amidst the political intrigue and household chaos, there was always the wild card of the occasional peasant revolt. These uprisings, often sparked by high taxes or food shortages, were the medieval equivalent of a stock market crash. They were unpredictable and could upend the delicate balance of power faster than you could say serfdom. Lords had to be both disciplinarian and diplomat, squashing dissent with one hand while extending an olive branch with the other. In this high-stakes Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, the role of the medieval aristocrat was both a privilege and a burden. They wielded immense power, but it came with its own set of chains, often forged by the very land they owned. Balancing the demands of wealth, power, and the occasional disgruntled peasant was no small feat. It required cunning, courage, and a fair amount of luck. Because in the end, the walls of a castle might keep out invaders, but they couldn't shield you from the complexities of medieval life. And so, the lords and ladies of the castle lived in a world where every decision could tip the scales of power, and where the walls of their fortress were both a sanctuary and a stage for the endless drama of medieval life. As we leave them to their feasts and feuds, keep in mind that this was just the beginning. The true test of their mettle was yet to come, as the winds of change were always blowing, threatening to reshape the landscape of power at any moment. But for now, let's leave them to their chess games and chamber music, for the next chapter of their story is just around the corner. And as the lords and ladies played their intricate games of power, behind the scenes, a small army of servants ensured that the castle didn't devolve into chaos. Ah, the servants, the unsung heroes of medieval life, whose daily grind was as far removed from the romanticized tales of knights and maidens as you can get. It's time to pull back the velvet curtain and spotlight the folks who kept the medieval machine humming. First on the roster is the steward, the head honcho of the servant hierarchy, wielding authority like a medieval HR manager with a penchant for ledger books. This wasn't your average household position. The steward was responsible for the entire estate's management, job that required the skills of an accountant, a diplomat, and occasionally a bouncer. Imagine juggling the accounts, ensuring the grain stores were full, and placating an irate cook all before breakfast. Not exactly the stuff of fairy tales, but hey, someone had to do it. Next in line was the chamberlain, the intimate confidant of the lord, tasked with managing the lord's private quarters and personal finances. A role that required discretion, a keen eye for detail, and, let's be honest, a knack for not commenting on the lord's questionable taste in chamber decor. If the steward was the CEO, think of the chamberlain as the CFO with a side gig as a personal assistant. And let's not forget the marshal, whose job was all about logistics, and horses lots of horses. The marshal oversaw the stables, ensuring the beasts were well fed and ready for anything from a leisurely ride to the occasional skirmish, not to mention the responsibility of organizing the transport of goods, which could include anything from barrels of ale to the lord's latest conquest in fine tapestry. It was a position that required the patience of a saint and the organizational skills of a seasoned event planner. But beneath these upper echelons were the foot soldiers of the castle workforce, the cooks, maids, grooms, and perhaps the most lowly, the scullions. These were the true backbone of the castle, toiling away in the kitchens and halls for wages that would barely buy a loaf of bread today. Take the scullion, for example, the lowest rung on the kitchen ladder, tasked with washing dishes and cleaning pots in an age where labor-saving device meant having a younger sibling help out. A scullion's pay was around $1 a week, which, after inflation, might buy you a small coffee at a hipster cafe today. Minus the latte art, of course. As if the meager wages weren't enough, the working conditions were about as appealing as a medieval dentist appointment. Picture smoky kitchens with roaring fires, where cooks labored over open flames, turning out meals that were more about sustenance than Michelin stars. The air was thick with the smell of roasting meat and simmering stews, a sensory assault that would have turned most modern health inspectors into a shrieking puddle of anxiety. But let's not romanticize this gritty reality too much. For the majority of servants, life in a castle was a grind, with little room for advancement unless you were exceptionally lucky, or say, saved the lord's favorite hound from an untimely fate. The social mobility of a castle servant was about as dynamic as a medieval tapestry, static and firmly nailed to the wall. Yet, for many, it was preferable to the harsh life of a peasant in the fields, where the only certainty was uncertainty itself. The harsh realities of servitude were balanced by the occasional perk. A warm meal, a roof over your head, and the chance to witness the grand dance of medieval politics up close. You might even catch a glimpse of a visiting noble or two, their finery a dazzling contrast to the drab uniforms of the castle staff. And let's not forget the opportunity to pick up a skill or two, because nothing says employable like the ability to spit roast a boar to perfection or manage a herd of surly sheep. The economic engine of a medieval castle churned relentlessly, driven by the sweat and toil of these servants. Their work was the grease in the gears, ensuring that the lord's table was ever laden with food, the stables were stocked, and the bedchambers were aired. They were the invisible hands that made the visible splendor of the castle possible. Now, let's tackle a myth or two while we're at it. The notion that all castle servants were downtrodden and miserable 24/7 is as accurate as claiming every medieval knight was a chivalrous hero. Sure, the hours were long, and the pay was lean, but for many servants, castle life offered a stability that was rare in medieval society. Plus, there was a certain camaraderie among the staff, a shared understanding that they were all in this together, whether cleaning chamber parts or preparing for a grand feast. Speaking of feasts, these events were the Super Bowl of the medieval world for castle staffs. It was all hands on deck, a mad scramble to ensure everything went off without a hitch, from the precise timing of the courses to the delicate dance of serving lords and ladies without spilling wine on anyone's brocade. A well-executed feast could elevate a household's reputation, while a blunder could see the head cook looking for new employment, possibly in a less prestigious establishment, like a roadside inn frequented by rowdy mercenaries. And while we're on the topic of myth-busting, let's address the idea of the loyal servant, the character trope so beloved by storytellers. In reality, the loyalty of castle servants was often tied to survival and necessity rather than heartfelt devotion. Sure, there were exceptions, those rare bonds of trust and mutual respect, but for most, loyalty was a transactional affair. Serve well, and you might secure a place within the castle's protective walls for a few more years. In the grand scheme of medieval society, the servants were the silent cogs, essential yet overlooked, the unsung heroes in a world that celebrated knights and nobility. They were the ones who kept the fires burning, the halls clean, and the horses ready to ride. Their stories, while not as glamorous as those of the lords and ladies, are no less vital to understanding the true tapestry of castle life. So next time you hear tales of medieval splendor, remember the servants behind the scenes, the ones who spun the wheels of this grand machine. They may not have worn crowns or wielded swords, but they were the pulse of the castle, the heartbeat that kept medieval life from flatlining into chaos. And while their lives might not have been filled with glory, they were undeniably rich in grit, determination, and the occasional spark of humor. As the servants lay down their tools and retire for the night, let's leave them to their well-earned rest. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of their world, a realm where every task held significance, and every day was a testament to endurance and adaptability. As we prepare to delve deeper into their lives and future challenges, keep in mind that their legacy is one of resilience, the kind that continues to echo through the stone halls of history. As we leave our hard-working servants to their well-deserved rest, let's shift our focus to the grand tapestry of social dynamics and cultural norms that wove together life in a medieval castle. If you're picturing a world of gallant knights and damsels swooning at the drop of a lance, prepare for a reality check. Sure, the legends of chivalry and courtly love captured the imagination, but the truth was more complex, like a Game of Thrones subplot minus the dragons. First, let's tackle the rigid hierarchy that defined castle life. Think of it as the medieval version of a corporate ladder, only with more chainmail and less chance of a corner office. At the top of the pecking order sat the lord and lady of the castle, the CEOs of this stone conglomerate. Their roles were intertwined with land management, political maneuvering, and keeping their heads, literally and figuratively, above the parapet. Below them were the knights, the middle managers of medieval society, tasked with defending the realm and occasionally wooing a lady with less than subtle serenades. Gender roles were as fixed as the mortar in the castle walls, with men and women facing a set of expectations that would make any modern HR department cringe. The lord was expected to be a warrior, a diplomat, and a manager, all rolled into one. Meanwhile, the lady was often the unsung hero, running the household with the efficiency of a seasoned CEO. Her responsibilities included everything from managing vast stores of provisions to ensuring that the tapestries were on point. In essence, she was the glue keeping the household from descending into chaos. But let's not pretend these roles were all sunshine and jousting. While the lady wielded significant power within the domestic sphere, her influence outside those walls was limited. Education for noblewomen was often restricted to the essentials: reading, writing, and enough Latin to impress at a dinner party. The idea of a lady making decisions in matters of state was as foreign as a fork at a medieval banquet. The knights, often romanticized as paragons of virtue, were as much about image as they were about action. Chivalry, that much-lauded code of conduct, was less about rescuing maidens and more about maintaining social order. It was a PR campaign for the warrior class, promoting ideals that were, in reality, as pliable as a soggy piece of bread. Sure, there were tales of bravery and honor, but let's not forget that the same knights could be found plundering villages and collecting taxes with all the grace of a bull in a china shop. Speaking of chivalry, notion of courtly love deserves a good debunking. The idea of knights writing sonnets to unattainable ladies might sound romantic, but it was more about social climbing than true love. These poetic exchanges were often exercises in diplomacy, a way for knights to gain favor or elevate their status. In reality, love in a medieval castle was less about moonlit strolls and more about strategic alliances. Marriages were contracts, often arranged to secure land, wealth, or political power, with love being a hopeful, yet optional, bonus. Religion, as you might expect, permeated every aspect of medieval life, from the grandest ceremonies to the humblest daily rituals. The castle chapel was a spiritual hub, where lords and ladies would gather for services that doubled as social gatherings. Religion dictated the rhythm of the year with a calendar so packed with feasts and fasts it would put any modern holiday planner to shame. But faith was more than just a series of events. It was a lens through which life was interpreted, offering a framework for understanding everything from crop failures to victories in battle. Education in the medieval castle was a privilege reserved for the nobility, with young lords and ladies receiving instruction in the arts, languages, and the all-important skill of diplomacy. Boys were groomed for leadership and warfare, learning to wield a sword with as much finesse as they handled estate accounts. Girls, on the other hand, were taught the fine art of household management, music, and needlework, a curriculum designed to prepare them for their roles as wives and mothers. Leisure time, when it could be snatched, was a curious blend of pastimes that ranged from the intellectually stimulating to the physically demanding. Chess and backgammon were popular among those who enjoyed a mental challenge, while hunting and falconry offered a chance to escape the confines of stone walls and test one's mettle against nature. These activities weren't merely for amusement. They reinforced social bonds and demonstrated the wealth and status of the participants. As we peel back the layers of castle life, it's clear that the romantic vision often attributed to this era is just that, a vision. The reality was a tapestry of power dynamics, social expectations, cultural norms that dictated the rhythm of daily life. The myth of chivalry, the allure of courtly love, and the steadfastness of religious tradition were all part of a complex web that made life in a medieval castle both fascinating and formidable. So, as we wrap up this exploration of medieval social dynamics, remember that behind every legend lies a truth more nuanced, more human, and often more compelling than we might first believe. The lords and ladies, knights and servants, each played their part in a grand narrative that was as challenging as it was captivating. A story not of fantasy, but of reality, warts and all. And while we've only just begun to unravel their world, the next chapter promises to delve even deeper into the intricacies that shape their lives and legacies. And so, as we wrap up this deep dive into the medieval world, we can't help but wonder why these ancient stone fortresses continue to enchant us, long after the last torch was extinguished. Let's face it, medieval castles are the original real estate eye candy, Gothic, grand, and as full of secrets as a politician's past. But it's not just their imposing structures that captivate us. It's the tales they tell, the echoes of a time when life was as unpredictable as a Game of Thrones plot twist. First, let's talk about the cultural footprint these castles have left. Literature has always had a torrid love affair with medieval castles, from the brooding bastions of Macbeth to the romantic ruins in Wuthering Heights. They serve as the perfect backdrop for tales of heroism, treachery, and the occasional ghost story to chill your bones. The myth of the noble knight and the damsel in distress. It's as enduring as the walls of Dover Castle, because who doesn't love a good rescue story, even if the reality was often more about alliances than amour? Castles also feature prominently in our modern obsession with fantasy, with Tolkien's Middle-earth and Martin's Westeros both drawing heavily from real medieval architecture and history. It's no coincidence that the dragon-haunted castles of Westeros feel so tangible. They're built on the bones of history. The truth is, these grand structures offer something our modern world often lacks: a sense of mystery, a tangible connection to the past when life was as perilous as it was simple. Then there's the tourism industry. Castles are the ultimate vacation selfie backdrop, and they've been luring tourists with their rugged charm long before tourism was an industry. The Tower of London alone draws over 3 million visitors a year, all eager to tread the same stones as Anne Boleyn, head included. And while you might not face the same precarious fate as her, you can still let your imagination run wild, picturing yourself as lord or lady of the manor, if only for an afternoon. Economically, castles were the medieval version of a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project. They provided jobs, supported local economies, and were often the center of commerce and trade. Fast forward to today, and they continue to be economic powerhouses, with their ancient stones contributing billions to the tourism industry. From the souvenir shops to the guided tours, castles are still pulling their weight, proving that good architecture never goes out of style. However, let's not get too swept up in the romance without acknowledging the harsh realities these castles represent. They were fortresses of power and control, often built on the backs of laborers whose names are lost to history. For every tale of a gallant knight, there's a story of a peasant revolt crushed beneath those same stones. The walls that now cradle tourists once bore witness to sieges and suffering, their grandeur a testament to both human creativity and the relentless pursuit of power. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, castles continue to be a symbol of endurance. They've withstood the test of time, weather, and warfare, monuments to resilience that remind us of our own potential to endure. They are a testament to the human spirit and its capacity to dream big, to build bigger, and to survive even when the odds are stacked as high as a castle's battlements. In the end, it's this duality, the blend of myth and reality, that keeps us fascinated. Castles are the ultimate paradox, beautiful yet brutal, romantic yet ruthless. They whisper stories of a world long gone, of people who lived and loved, fought and fell within their mighty walls. And as we stand in their shadow, we are reminded of our own stories, our desires for legacy, and our quest for meaning in a world that, much like the medieval one, is both wondrous and wild. So, whether you're a history buff, a romantic, or just someone who appreciates a good ruin, remember that behind every stone lies a story. And as you wander through these ancient halls, let yourself be swept away by the echoes of the past, while keeping one foot firmly planted in the present. Because, much like a well-built castle, the stories we tell about them are here to stay, enduring as long as there are ears to hear and imaginations to dream. If you ever wanted to buy a piece of prime real estate in the 11th century, you might have set your sights on a place called Great Zimbabwe. Nestled in the southeastern hills of present-day Zimbabwe, this was the spot where the savvy real estate moguls of the past decided to lay some serious foundations. Literally. They didn't just plop down a few huts and call it a day. They built an entire stone city, and they did it without a single Home Depot in sight. Talk about DIY ambition. Now, let's talk location, location, location. Great Zimbabwe was strategically placed between the Limpopo and Zambezi rivers, which sounds fancy, but it was also a clever move. These waterways made it a perfect hub for trade, allowing the city's inhabitants to engage in commerce with distant lands. Picture this: gold, ivory, and exotic goods flowing in and out like the Amazon prime of the medieval world. And did I mention it was on a high plateau? This gave them a nice defensive advantage, not to mention some killer views. Ever heard of curb appeal? The site itself is about 800 acres, which is roughly the size of Central Park. But instead of joggers and street performers, there were massive stone walls and towers, some of which soared over 30 feet high. These weren't built for any mundane purpose like keeping the neighbors' chickens out. No, these were fortifications and symbols of power, prestige, and a well-executed civil engineering plan. They didn't just stack stones haphazardly. They laid them with such precision that you'd have a hard time fitting a credit card between them. This was masonry that would make even the most seasoned architect nod in approval. Let's not forget the Great Enclosure, the largest single ancient structure in sub-Saharan Africa. It's kind of like the pyramid's lesser-known cousin who throws the best parties but doesn't get enough credit. This massive oval-shaped wall is about 820 feet in circumference and encloses a labyrinth of passageways and towers. Some speculate it was a royal residence, a temple, or maybe even a venue for epic medieval raves. The truth is, we're still not entirely sure what went down inside those walls, but one thing's for certain: it was impressive. Now, here's where the plot thickens. You might have heard some wild tales about the origins of Great Zimbabwe. For centuries, people speculated about the builders, attributing the site to everyone from the Phoenicians to King Solomon. Spoiler alert, it was none of them. The real builders were the ancestors of the Shona people, a Bantu ethnic group indigenous to the region. It's a classic case of underestimating local talent and over-crediting outsiders. This myth-busting moment is brought to you by archaeology, the ultimate truth-teller of history. Speaking of archaeology, let's dig into some of the key finds that have helped us piece together the city's story. Excavations have unearthed a treasure trove of artifacts, including Chinese porcelain, Arab coins, and glass beads from India. These items tell us that Great Zimbabwe wasn't just a local hotspot. It was an international player. It was like the medieval version of a bustling airport terminal, minus the delays and overpriced coffee. These trade connections were facilitated by the city's most lucrative resource: gold. That's right, they weren't just sitting on a pile of rocks. They had access to gold mines that rivaled the wealth of any fantasy kingdom. So next time someone tells you money doesn't grow on trees, remind them it does, however, come from the ground. The city's economy wasn't just about bling, though. They had an impressive agricultural system, too. The surrounding lands were fertile, perfect for growing crops like sorghum and millet. They raised cattle, which not only provided food, but also served as a form of currency. Imagine paying your rent in cows. It's a wonder landlords didn't demand a pet deposit for all that livestock. But here's where things get intriguing: the social and political structure of Great Zimbabwe. This wasn't some lawless frontier town. It was a highly organized society, with a king or chief at the top, and a hierarchy that ensured smooth operation. The rulers weren't just sitting around on golden thrones. They were actively engaged in diplomacy and commerce. It's like if the CEO of a Fortune 500 company also had to keep the peace with neighboring tribes and manage a bustling trade empire. A little more demanding than your average desk job, wouldn't you say? As we peel back the layers of Great Zimbabwe's origins, it's clear this wasn't just a random collection of stones in the wilderness. It was a thriving metropolis, an engineering marvel, and an economic powerhouse. It's a testament to human ingenuity, determination, and yes, a bit of luck in picking the right spot. So next time you're stuck in traffic or complaining about your city's infrastructure, spare a thought for the folks who built a stone city in the middle of Africa 1,000 years ago. They didn't have modern technology or even a decent cup of coffee, but they sure knew how to build a city that would stand the test of time. If you think the gold rushes of the 19th century were wild, buckle up for the trade networks of Great Zimbabwe, which were the ancient world's version of a Black Friday sale, minus the chaos and trampling. The city wasn't just sitting pretty on that high plateau. It was the epicenter of a bustling trade network that spanned the Indian Ocean and beyond. Picture a medieval version of a global supply chain, where instead of tracking packages on your phone, you'd await the arrival of goods with the patience of a saint, or a very bored customs officer. The economic engine of Great Zimbabwe was fueled primarily by gold, the bling of all blings. This wasn't your standard issue gold rush, though. We're talking about a meticulously managed extraction and trade operation. The gold from the region was so abundant that it was practically asking to be mined. Local miners used simple tools to extract it from the rivers and soil, turning it into a commodity that would travel thousands of miles. If you think finding a nugget of gold in your backyard is a 1 in a million shot, these folks were living the dream. You could say their economy was as shiny as their merchandise. Now, let's not forget the real MVP of this trade operation, the Indian Ocean trade routes. These maritime highways were the superhighways of their day, connecting Great Zimbabwe to the Swahili coast, the Middle East, and even as far as China and India. It was like the Silk Road, but wetter, and with more sea shanties. Ships laden with goods would make their way across treacherous seas, carrying gold, ivory, and other treasures to distant ports, only to return with exotic wares like Chinese porcelain, Persian textiles, and Indian beads. The Great Zimbabweans were the original international shoppers, collecting a global array of products long before globalism was a buzzword. But before you get swept up in the romance of peaceful maritime commerce, let's inject a dose of reality. Trade wasn't all smiles and handshakes. Navigating these waters was as political as it was perilous. Pirates, storms, and trade rivalries were just a few of the hazards. Think of it as the ancient version of negotiating a ceasefire between Amazon and eBay sellers. And those trade negotiations, less about polite haggling over price, and more about strategic alliances and power plays. It's not all treasure chests and exotic goods. Sometimes it's about who's got the bigger fleet. The goods flowing into Great Zimbabwe weren't just for the local market, either. The elites of the city knew how to flaunt their wealth and were keen to display their exotic imports. Imagine hosting a dinner party and casually serving your guests off imported porcelain with glass beads as party favors. It was the ultimate flex, a way to say, look at us, we're connected, without uttering a single word. These imported goods were not just items. They were status symbols, much like the latest iPhone or a designer handbag today. Of course, trade wasn't limited to gold and luxury items. The bustling markets of Great Zimbabwe were filled with everyday commodities as well, such as textiles, salt, and foodstuffs. The city's strategic position allowed it to act as a middleman on a grand scale, trading local products for foreign ones and vice versa. It was like a medieval version of a modern-day hedge fund, diversifying portfolios and maximizing returns, all without a single spreadsheet in sight. Let's also talk about the human element in this trade network. While goods were moving, so were people. Traders, sailors, and merchants from various cultures mingled in Great Zimbabwe, exchanging not just goods, but ideas and stories. This cultural exchange was the internet of the ancient world, spreading knowledge and innovations. The city was a melting pot long before we had a term for it, a vibrant hub of cultural and economic dynamism. It's amazing what a little gold and an open trade policy can achieve. But economic prosperity doesn't come without its share of challenges. Managing such an extensive trade network required savvy diplomacy and strategic alliances. The rulers of Great Zimbabwe needed to keep regional peace while ensuring their trade routes remained secure. It was like trying to run a multinational corporation while also keeping the peace with the neighbors. No small feat when you consider the stakes involved. And let's not romanticize the past too much. Behind the glittering facade of trade and prosperity, there were undoubtedly issues of exploitation and inequality. The labor required to extract gold and maintain trade routes wasn't exactly cushy. Imagine working in the heat of the Zimbabwean sun, mining gold with basic tools, while the fruits of your labor sailed off to foreign lands. It's a reminder that even the most prosperous societies have their shadows. As we wrap up this segment of our journey through Great Zimbabwe, we've seen how this stone city was more than just a pretty face. It was an economic powerhouse, a central player in an international trade network that spanned continents. It's a testament to human ingenuity, the power of strategic location, and a bit of luck with resource distribution. But as we'll see in the next parts of our exploration, there's more to this ancient city than meets the eye. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the social and political intricacies that made Great Zimbabwe not just a city of stone, but a civilization of significance. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how Great Zimbabwe wasn't just a city with impressive stone structures, but a complex society with a social and political tapestry that would make Game of Thrones look like child's play. The rulers of Great Zimbabwe weren't content with just sitting atop their stone thrones, basking in the glow of gold and imported trinkets. Oh no, they had the tricky business of running a kingdom to tend to. Cue the medieval version of office politics. At the top of the social pyramid was the king, or Mambos, a title that sounds like it should come with a dance move, but actually came with a hefty dose of responsibility. The king wasn't just a figurehead. He was the linchpin holding the entire society together. Imagine a CEO who also happens to be the mayor, chief diplomat, and spiritual leader. That's multitasking to the extreme, with a side of divine right. The king wielded power not just through wealth, but through a carefully curated image of divine affiliation and earthly authority. It's like if your boss claimed to have a direct line to the higher-ups, literally. These kings had to maintain a delicate balance of power, navigating alliances and rivalries like a pro. The court was filled with advisors and officials, each with their own agendas, because what's a kingdom without a little internal intrigue? These were the original office water-cooler politics, where a well-timed whisper could make or break a career or a kingdom. The king's ability to manage these relationships often determined the stability of his reign. It's hard enough managing a small team on a project, let alone an entire kingdom with its fair share of backstabbers and sycophants. Power wasn't just about who wore the crown. It trickled down through a hierarchy that, while rigid, wasn't completely impermeable. Below the king, there were the elites, chiefs and nobles who controlled different regions of the kingdom. These weren't just any nobles. They were the gatekeepers of the kingdom's wealth, managing the distribution of resources and maintaining order in their domains. Think regional managers, but with more gold and less paperwork. They paid tribute to the king, reinforcing the central power, while keeping a nice chunk of the pie for themselves. It was a symbiotic relationship that kept the wheels of the kingdom turning smoothly most of the time. For the common folk, life in Great Zimbabwe was a mix of routine and resilience. The farmers, artisans, and traders formed the backbone of the economy, although their daily grind was far from glamorous. They were the unsung heroes, the ones who made sure the markets bustled and the granaries were stocked. Picture them as the medieval gig economy, working hard to keep the kingdom running, often with little recognition. Their lives were governed by a combination of subsistence farming and participation in local trade, ensuring that the city remained self-sufficient even as it engaged in international commerce. As with any society, disparity was a defining feature. The divide between the elites and the commoners was as stark as the stone walls that encircled the great enclosure. While the elites enjoyed the spoils of trade and the protection of their king, commoners dealt with the harsh realities of medieval life. It was a world where the gleam of imported porcelain contrasted sharply with the toil of daily survival. Yet, the sense of community and shared culture provided a cohesive social structure that kept the society from fracturing. And what about the myths of benevolent rulership? Allure of the legendary wise king who ruled with fairness and a gentle hand. Sure, there were probably moments of genuine leadership and care, but let's not kid ourselves. Rulership in the medieval world was often as benevolent as a tax audit. Kings maintained power through a mix of diplomacy, force, and strategic marriages, not exactly the stuff of fairy tales. It's a reminder that while legends are lovely, the reality of power is often messier and far less idealistic. The political landscape was also a game of perpetual chess, with regional chiefs and rival kingdoms always a potential threat. This wasn't a society that could rest on its laurels. The king had to be a master of diplomacy, keeping alliances strong and enemies at bay. It's a bit like that tricky balancing act of office politics, where you have to keep everyone happy while staying one step ahead of the competition. One wrong move, and the delicate equilibrium could topple, with repercussions that echoed across the kingdom. The power dynamics didn't just stop at the borders of Great Zimbabwe. The king had to navigate relationships with neighboring tribes and kingdoms, maintaining peace through a combination of trade agreements, marriage alliances, and sometimes a show of force. It was a diplomatic dance, one that required the finesse of a seasoned politician and the ruthlessness of a strategist. Imagine trying to negotiate a merger while also managing a hostile takeover. Just another day in the life of a medieval ruler. While the elites lived in relative luxury, the common people found strength in community and shared traditions. Festivals, religious ceremonies, and local markets were vibrant expressions of culture that transcended social divides. These were the moments when the city came alive, a reminder that even amid political maneuverings and economic disparities, the spirit of the people could not be dimmed. It was a society that thrived on connection and continuity, where the past was never far from the present. In the end, the social and political structure of Great Zimbabwe was as complex as the stone labyrinths that define the city's ruins. It was a society where power was both centralized and distributed, where kings ruled with a mix of authority and acumen, and where commoners played a vital, if sometimes overlooked, role. The myths and realities of this ancient kingdom remind us that while the trappings of power may change, the human instincts that drive us remain remarkably consistent. And as we peel back the layers of Great Zimbabwe's history, we're left with a clearer picture of a society that was both a product of its time and a testament to timeless human ambition. Stay with us as we continue to unravel the fascinating story of Great Zimbabwe, where the stones speak of power, prosperity, and the enduring spirit of a remarkable civilization. In the next part, we'll delve into the cultural and religious life of this ancient society, exploring how beliefs and practices shaped their world in ways both profound and pragmatic. Ready for more ancient intrigue? Stick around as we journey deeper into the heart of Great Zimbabwe. As we embark on the next leg of our journey through the heart of Great Zimbabwe, let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of its builders. This isn't just about a few rocks stacked for fun. We're talking about architectural feats that would make even the most seasoned DIY enthusiast break out in a cold sweat. Imagine constructing a city of stone without cranes, power tools, or even a YouTube tutorial to guide you. It's enough to send a shiver down the spine of anyone who's struggled with assembling a flat-packed bookshelf. First things first, let's tackle the myth of magical construction. There are legends that suggest the stones of Great Zimbabwe were levitated into place by ancient sorcerers or aliens with a penchant for masonry. While it makes for a thrilling bedtime story, the reality is far more grounded, and frankly, more impressive. The builders of Great Zimbabwe, the ancestors of the Shona people, used a technique called dry stone walling. This method involves carefully selecting and fitting stones together without mortar, relying on gravity and friction to hold everything in place. It's like playing Tetris with rocks, but on a colossal scale. The largest and most famous of these constructions is the Great Enclosure, which boasts walls that soar up to 36 feet high and stretch over 820 feet in circumference. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the height of a 3-story building and the length of nearly 3 football fields. The stones were quarried locally, each one painstakingly shaped to fit snugly against its neighbors, creating a seamless and sturdy structure that has withstood the test of time. No small feat considering the only power tools available were, well, human hands and determination. Now, you might be wondering how they managed to hoist these hefty stones into place without the benefit of modern machinery. The answer lies in good old-fashioned ingenuity and a workforce that would put your local gym rats to shame. The labor force behind Great Zimbabwe was likely composed of skilled craftsmen, laborers, and possibly even conscripted workers from surrounding areas. This wasn't just a weekend project with a few friends. It was a massive undertaking that would have required a well-organized system of labor and logistics. Let's talk numbers for a moment. It's estimated that the Great Enclosure alone comprises over 15,000 metric tons of stone. That's about the weight of 500 fully grown African elephants, for those who prefer their measurements in pachyderms. Transporting and positioning these stones would have involved a combination of manpower, simple machines like levers and ramps, and perhaps even a touch of brute force. It's a testament to human determination and problem-solving, proving that you don't need advanced technology to achieve remarkable feats of engineering. Of course, the architectural prowess of Great Zimbabwe wasn't just about building big, it was also about building smart. The layout of the city was carefully planned to maximize both functionality and aesthetics. The stone walls weren't just decorative, they served practical purposes such as fortification, privacy, and the delineation of sacred spaces. It's like an ancient version of urban planning, where every wall and passageway had its place and purpose. The great enclosure itself may have served as a royal residence, a ceremonial site, or perhaps even a status symbol, a way to flaunt the power and prestige of the ruling elite. But let's not get too starry-eyed. Behind the grandeur of stone walls and towering enclosures lies the harsh reality of medieval construction. The laborers who built Great Zimbabwe likely faced grueling conditions, working long hours in the sweltering African sun with little more than basic tools and sheer grit. It's a stark reminder that history is often written by the victors and the elites, with the voices of the common workers lost to time. So next time you admire the grandeur of an ancient monument, spare a thought for the countless hands that toiled to bring it to life. The cultural significance of Great Zimbabwe's architecture extends beyond its walls. These structures were not only feats of engineering, but also symbols of identity and continuity for the Shona people. They represented a connection to the land and a testament to the accomplishments of their ancestors. In a world where power and prestige were often measured by the ability to build and maintain monumental structures, Great Zimbabwe stood as a beacon of architectural and cultural achievement. The influence of Great Zimbabwe's architecture can be seen in later civilizations across southern Africa. The stone building techniques pioneered here were adapted and refined by subsequent cultures, leaving a legacy of stone ruins that dot the landscape today. It's a testament to the enduring impact of Great Zimbabwe, a civilization that, though it may have faded into history, continues to shape the cultural and architectural landscape of the region. As we wrap up this exploration of Great Zimbabwe's architectural marvels, it's clear that the city was more than just a collection of stones. It was a testament to human ingenuity, an icon of cultural identity, and a symbol of the enduring spirit of the Shona people. But we're not done yet. There's still more to uncover in the next part of our journey. Stay tuned as we delve into the cultural and religious life of this ancient society, exploring how beliefs and practices shaped their world in ways both profound and pragmatic. The adventure continues. As we dive headfirst into the final chapter of our Great Zimbabwe saga, let's shift our focus from stones to stories, specifically the tales of decline and legacy. You might have heard whispers of a sudden collapse, a grand city left to the whims of time and nature. But before you start picturing a medieval apocalypse or a dramatic last stand, let's pump the brakes on that Hollywood script. Great Zimbabwe's decline wasn't akin to a cinematic fall from grace. It was more of a slow fade, like a song gently easing into silence. Theories abound, and like any good mystery, there's no single culprit. Instead, we have a lineup of suspects, environmental changes, economic shifts, and perhaps a touch of political turmoil. It's like a historical whodunit, but without the monocles and melodrama. First up, let's talk ecology. The city's very success might have sowed the seeds of its challenges. As Great Zimbabwe thrived, its population grew, and with growth came the relentless demand for resources. Picture a bustling metropolis trying to feed its people while maintaining its status as a trade hub. This wasn't your average supply and demand scenario, more like a high-stakes balancing act. Archaeological evidence suggests overgrazing and deforestation might have led to soil exhaustion. Imagine trying to farm a dust bowl, not exactly ideal for your medieval farmer's market. Then there's the economic angle. Glittering trade network that had once been the city's lifeblood began to shift. By the 15th century, trade routes were evolving, with the Swahili coast and other emerging powers capturing the commercial spotlight. It's like being the star of the show, only to discover that the audience has moved on to the next big act. The gold that once flowed so freely from the rivers and streams started to dwindle, and with it, the economic engine of Great Zimbabwe sputtered. Politically, the scene wasn't much rosier. Power dynamics were changing, and the centralized authority that had kept the kingdom in check began to fray. Think of it as a kingdom-sized game of Jenga. Pull out too many pieces, and the whole thing starts to wobble. Rival factions and new centers of power rose up, challenging the old guard and shifting the balance of influence. It was less about sword fights and more about the subtle but relentless erosion of control. Now, some might argue for a more thrilling version of events, imagining invading armies or internal revolts. While it's tempting to picture a climactic showdown, the lack of evidence for such dramatic events suggests a quieter exit. The city was likely gradually abandoned as people sought new opportunities elsewhere. It's not a story of catastrophe, but of adaptation, as communities dispersed and new centers of power emerged, like the Mutapa and Torwa states. Change was in the air, and Great Zimbabwe's inhabitants were savvy enough to roll with the punches. In the end, Great Zimbabwe didn't vanish in a puff of smoke or crumble overnight. It transitioned, leaving behind its stone skeletons as mute witnesses to a rich and complex past. The city's decline was a multifaceted process, one that defies the simplicity of a single narrative. It's a reminder that history, like life, is rarely black and white. More often than not, it's a shade of gray, filled with nuance and complexity. Now, let's pivot from endings to legacies, because Great Zimbabwe's story doesn't end with its decline. On the contrary, its legacy is alive and kicking, impacting how we understand African history today. For starters, it challenges the outdated and downright patronizing notion that complex societies and architectural marvels were the sole domain of non-African civilizations. Great Zimbabwe stands as a resounding testament to the ingenuity and capability of African peoples, a narrative that had been overlooked for far too long. The site itself, with its towering stone structures, has become a symbol of national pride for Zimbabwe. It's a cultural touchstone, a reminder of a vibrant past, and a beacon for future generations. Recognizing its significance, UNESCO declared Great Zimbabwe a World Heritage Site in 1986, ensuring that its legacy would be preserved and celebrated. It's a story not just of stones and trade, but of identity and heritage, a rich tapestry woven into the very fabric of African history. As we reflect on Great Zimbabwe, it's worth considering how our understanding of the past shapes our view of the present. The city's story challenges us to look beyond the stereotypes and simplistic narratives, urging us to embrace the complexity and richness of African history. It's a call to recognize the diversity of human experiences and the many threads that weave together the story of our shared humanity. In hindsight, we can chuckle at the absurdity of past misconceptions, like the idea that outsiders must have built such a remarkable city. It's a reminder that historical narratives often reflect the biases of those who write them. So, the next time someone tries to sell you a tale of ancient aliens or lost civilizations, remember the story of Great Zimbabwe and the remarkable people who crafted its legacy. As we wrap up this journey, let's leave behind the dusty ruins and romanticized myths. Instead, let's carry forward the real legacy of Great Zimbabwe, a testament to human resilience, innovation, and the enduring power of cultural identity. In the grand tapestry of history, Great Zimbabwe is a vibrant thread, a reminder of a remarkable civilization that, though it may have faded from prominence, will never be forgotten. And with that, dear listeners, we conclude our exploration of Great Zimbabwe, a story as rich and enduring as the stones themselves. Under the crackling skies of 1856 Croatia, Nikola Tesla was born, a man destined to light up the world, quite literally. Picture a bright-eyed boy in the village of Smiljan, dreaming not of dragons or knights, but of electrons and currents. Now, you might be thinking, did this guy actually dream in volts and amps? Well, sort of. Legend has it that Tesla was born during a lightning storm, leading the midwife to claim he'd be a child of darkness. His mother, however, had a different take. No, he will be a child of light. Talk about foreshadowing. Tesla grew up in a family that was equal parts supportive and skeptical of his scientific curiosities. His father, a Serbian Orthodox priest, hoped young Nikola would follow in his ecclesiastical footsteps. But Tesla had other plans that involved harnessing the raw power of nature. By 60, he was already designing a water turbine, a precursor to his later ingenious inventions. And while his childhood projects didn't exactly revolutionize energy production, they did hint at a mind that was, quite literally, wired differently. Fast forward to 1884. Tesla was 28 years old, standing on American soil with just 4 cents to his name. If you think your student loans are rough, imagine crossing the Atlantic with nothing but a dream and a pocketful of change. But Tesla wasn't just any immigrant. He was a man on a mission to electrify the future. America, the land of opportunity, was also a land of fierce competition and cutthroat industrialists. Enter Thomas Edison, the wizard of Menlo Park, whose light bulbs were already making headlines. Tesla didn't waste time in seeking out Edison. He pitched up at Edison's office with ambition blazing brighter than any incandescent bulb. Edison, a man who had his fingers in every electrical pie, saw potential in Tesla. He hired him to improve his DC, direct current, generators, promising a tidy sum of $50,000 if Tesla could achieve certain improvements. Spoiler alert, that promise turned out to be as reliable as Edison's initial light bulbs, flickering and prone to going out at inopportune moments. Tesla, ever the optimist, dove into the work, clocking an almost inhuman number of hours in pursuit of perfection. And guess what? He did it. Tesla not only improved Edison's generators, he brought new efficiencies that could have saved Edison a fortune. But when Tesla asked for his reward, Edison reportedly quipped, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor," a clever way of saying, "The joke's on you." Instead of the promised cash, Edison offered a measly $10 a week raise. Talk about getting short-circuited. Frustrated but undeterred, Tesla left Edison's employ, creating a rift that would soon become a chasm. And thus began the infamous war of currents. On one side, Edison, championing direct current, a method that was, quite frankly, more suited to powering a toaster than a city. On the other, Tesla, advocating for alternating current, AC, which could travel long distances without losing voltage. AC was the future, and Tesla knew it. But Edison, stubborn as a mule with an engineering degree, wasn't about to yield. Edison, ever the showman, went to extraordinary lengths to discredit AC. In a move that was equal parts dramatic and macabre, he publicly electrocuted animals to demonstrate the supposed dangers of Tesla's system. He even lobbied for the electric chair to be powered by AC, hoping to brand it as the executioner's current. It was a PR campaign that would make even modern political spin doctors blush. But Tesla had a secret weapon, George Westinghouse. This industrialist saw the potential in AC and teamed up with Tesla to take on Edison's DC empire. Together, they lit up the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, dazzling visitors with the brilliance of AC-powered lights. The fair was a turning point, showing the world that Tesla's vision was not just safe and reliable, but downright spectacular. As the dust settled, AC emerged victorious, becoming the standard for electrical power transmission. Tesla had won the battle, but the war had taken its toll. Despite his genius, Tesla's financial acumen was, let's say, less than electrifying. While Edison amassed a fortune, Tesla struggled with debt, his grand ideas often outpacing his bank balance. Yet, through the ups and downs, Tesla remained a man of vision, driven by a belief in a future where energy was as free and abundant as air. He once said, "The present is theirs. The future, for which I really worked, is mine." And in those words lies the essence of Tesla. a man who saw beyond the horizon, whose dreams of wireless power and global communication still resonate today. So here we leave Tesla for now, standing at the dawn of a new electric age, a hero of alternating current and a visionary whose ideas continue to spark innovation. The man who lit up the world may have had his feet firmly planted in the 19th century, but his mind was light years ahead, illuminating the path for generations to come. So, Tesla, standing at the precipice of this new electric era, had much more than just a spark of genius lighting his path. But genius only gets you so far when the world is wired for cash and contracts. After his dramatic departure from Edison's camp, Tesla didn't just sit around sulking in the shadow of a broken promise. No, he leaped into the world of patents and partnerships, because nothing says independence quite like a stack of legal documents. Enter George Westinghouse, the industrialist with a keen eye for innovation, and crucially, a wallet that wasn't afraid to take a gamble. He was like the venture capitalist of the 19th century, except instead of betting on the next tech startup, he was backing the future of electricity. Westinghouse saw the potential in AC, and more importantly, in Tesla. In 1888, he bought the rights to Tesla's patents for AC motors and power systems, reportedly offering $60,000 in cash and stock, plus $2, 50 royalty per horsepower produced by each motor. For Tesla, this was like winning the Powerball, finally, a payday that matched his potential. But if you think this was the end of Tesla's financial woes, think again. The world of business is a lot like a high-stakes poker game. You can have a fantastic hand, but it's the bluffing and bidding that determine the winner. Westinghouse, despite his initial enthusiasm and deep pockets, quickly found himself in a financial squeeze. The war of currents wasn't just a battle of ideas. It was a costly conflict that drained resources faster than a leaky faucet. The economic reality was harsh. Westinghouse's company was bleeding money, and the pressure was mounting. In a move that would likely make a modern-day CFO break into a cold sweat, Westinghouse approached Tesla with a desperate plea to waive the royalty agreement. Now, Tesla could have held firm, but his vision wasn't about lining his pockets. He was all about lighting up the world. So, in a decision that has been debated by armchair historians ever since, Tesla tore up the contract, effectively handing Westinghouse a lifeline and sacrificing a fortune in the process. Talk about playing the long game. Meanwhile, the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago was on the horizon. This event was like the Met Gala of the 19th century, if the Met Gala was about showing off technological prowess instead of outlandish fashion. The fair organizers needed someone to light up the night, and after a competitive bidding process, Westinghouse, powered by Tesla's AC system, won the contract. It was a pivotal moment. As the lights flickered on, illuminating the white city in a brilliant display of electric wonder, AC wasn't just proven safe, it was proven spectacular. But let's pause for a moment before we get too starry-eyed. The reality was that even this triumph came with a side of financial anxiety. Despite the dazzling success at the World's Fair, Tesla's finances were, quite frankly, a mess. He was living in hotels, tinkering away in his lab, and dreaming up inventions that were as futuristic as they were costly. And while the myth of Tesla as a multimillionaire inventor persists, the truth is far less glamorous. His financial situation was more akin to a roller coaster ride through a haunted house, plenty of ups and downs, with a fair share of ghosts from past decisions. Speaking of quirks, we can't talk about Tesla without mentioning his unusual friendships. While his human relationships were often fraught with tension and misunderstanding, Tesla found solace in the company of pigeons. Yes, pigeons. In the bustling heart of New York City, he would visit parks and feed these feathered friends, even claiming he loved one particular pigeon as a man loves a woman. It's a statement that sounds more like something out of a quirky indie film than a historical biography, but it adds layers to the enigmatic character of Tesla. He was a man of contradictions, a visionary who struggled with the here and now, a loner who found companionship in the unlikeliest of places. So, as we leave Tesla at this juncture, poised between triumph and turmoil, remember that his story is more than just a tale of scientific achievement. It's about the highs and lows of ambition, the price of progress, and the complexity of human nature. Tesla's leap into independence wasn't just a bold move. It was a testament to his relentless pursuit of a future he could see so clearly, yet one that remained just out of reach. Stay tuned, because the story of Nikola Tesla is far from over, and the best and strangest is yet to come. And so, Tesla stood on the brink of his greatest and perhaps most tragic pursuits. The man was practically a walking paradox, either a visionary genius or a mad scientist, depending on which side of the lab you were standing. But hey, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Tesla's story is like a complex electrical circuit, fascinating, intricate, and occasionally prone to short-circuiting. Let's kick things off with the Tesla coil, one of those inventions that makes you wonder if Tesla was trying to communicate with aliens or just really into impressive light shows. In 1891, Tesla developed this high-voltage, high-frequency transformer circuit, which he demonstrated by sending electricity through the air to light up lamps without wires. This was before Wi-Fi, folks. Tesla was essentially showing off a Victorian-era Bluetooth speaker. Now, you might be thinking, wireless electricity? Is this guy for real? Well, the Tesla coil wasn't exactly practical for running your toaster, but it was a marvel of engineering and a testament to Tesla's belief in wireless energy transmission. Imagine hosting a dinner party and casually lighting up lamps with a flick of your wrist. Just don't invite the guy with a pacemaker. The coil was a showstopper, but Tesla had his eyes set on something much bigger, global wireless energy. Enter Wardenclyffe Tower, Tesla's magnum opus, or, depending on who you ask, his financial black hole. Built on Long Island in the early 1900s, this 187-foot tower was supposed to be the launch pad for Tesla's dream of transmitting free electricity across the globe. Think of it as the original Wi-Fi, but instead of streaming cat videos, it was meant to power entire cities. Tesla's vision was audacious, to say the least. He planned for Wardenclyffe to send electric energy through the Earth itself, tapping into the planet's natural frequencies. If that sounds a bit like sci-fi, it's because it kind of was. But Tesla was convinced it was possible. And who are we to argue with a guy who could light up New York with a flick of a switch? Of course, such grand visions come with equally grand costs. Funding Wardenclyffe was no small feat, and Tesla needed investors with deep pockets and even deeper patience. Enter J.P. Morgan, the finance titan, who was more used to dealing in cold, hard cash than in visionary dreams. Morgan initially backed Tesla with $150,000, which today would be about $4 million, a hefty sum, but not exactly a blank check. Yet, even Morgan's considerable wealth had limits, and the project soon began draining funds faster than a leaky bucket. As construction of the tower progressed, Tesla's ambitions grew wilder. He wanted Wardenclyffe to be the center of a global communication network, transmitting messages, weather forecasts, even stock market reports. In Tesla's mind, it was a world-changing hub of information and energy, a vision that, in modern terms, sounds suspiciously like the internet. Unfortunately, the technology of the time wasn't quite up to the challenge, and neither were the investors. Morgan, realizing that Tesla's dream was spiraling into an expensive nightmare, pulled the financial plug. Without Morgan's backing, Wardenclyffe was left stranded, an abandoned monument to ambition. The tower was eventually dismantled in 1917, sold for scrap to pay off Tesla's mounting debts. Talk about a harsh lesson in economics. Dream big, but don't forget to pay the bills. Despite the collapse of Wardenclyffe, Tesla's obsession with wireless energy never waned. He continued to tinker with his ideas, often in makeshift labs, driven more by passion than practicality. The world labeled him an eccentric, a title that Tesla wore with a mix of pride and exasperation. After all, when your dreams outsize your bank account, people start to talk. Yet the line between genius and madness is as thin as a wire, and Tesla walked it with aplomb. Hollywood loves the trope of the mad scientist, the lone inventor toiling away in a dimly lit lab, surrounded by arcs of electricity and questionable hygiene. But Tesla was more than a caricature. He was a man driven by a belief in a better future, even if his methods seemed, well, a bit unorthodox. Take his experiments with resonant frequencies, for example. Legend has it that Tesla once caused a mini-earthquake in Manhattan while testing one of his oscillators, a device designed to generate mechanical vibrations. The building shook, people panicked, and Tesla calmly smashed his own machine to halt the chaos. It's a story that paints him as both brilliant and slightly terrifying. And while the truth is probably less dramatic, it certainly adds to the mythos. In the end, Tesla's story is as electrifying as the inventions he left behind. He was a man out of time, perhaps too far ahead of his era for his own good. But even if his grandest dreams never fully materialized, his legacy is undeniable. The Tesla coil still fascinates engineers and hobbyists alike, and Wardenclyffe stands as a symbol of unyielding ambition. So, as we leave Tesla tinkering away in his lab, remember that his life was more than just a series of failures or successes. It was a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of innovation. He may not have given the world free electricity, but he did light up the path for future generations, proving that even the wildest ideas can spark a revolution. Stay tuned, because the Tesla saga is far from over. There's more brilliance and eccentricity to explore, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Tesla's story, like a winding coil, is far from finished, and the next chapter is a mix of brilliance and bewilderment. By the time the 20th century rolled around, Tesla was knee-deep in experiments with radio waves, a field that was as cutting-edge as it was competitive. This is where we meet Guglielmo Marconi, the Italian inventor who played a pivotal role in radio's development, and also in one of history's most contentious patent battles. Tesla was already experimenting with radio as early as 1893, demonstrating that he could transmit signals wirelessly. By 1897, he had filed for 2 patents concerning the transmission of electrical signals. Yet, it was Marconi who managed to send the first transatlantic radio signal in 1901, a feat that crowned him the king of radio waves. The world applauded Marconi, but Tesla, ever the underdog in the story of his own life, was fuming. He saw his ideas being broadcasted from someone else's station, and he wasn't about to let it slide. In 1904, the U.S. Patent Office delivered a blow that would haunt Tesla. Marconi was awarded the patent for the invention of radio, despite Tesla's earlier filings. The reason? Money talks, and Marconi's financial backers included the likes of Thomas Edison and Andrew Carnegie. Talk about your heavyweight tag team. Tesla's reaction was a mix of resignation and disdain. He famously quipped, "Marconi is a good fellow. Let him continue. He is using 17 of my patents." Ouch. For Tesla, the patent snub was like being told you couldn't sit at the cool kids' table, even though you brought the table and chairs. But before we feel too sorry for him, let's remember that Tesla was never one to let a setback stop him. If anything, he doubled down, continuing his experiments and nurturing ideas that were still light years ahead of their time, even if his bank account was firmly stuck in the present. While we're on the subject of Tesla's quirks, let's dive into his fascination with numbers, especially 3, 6, and 9. Tesla believed these numbers held the key to the universe, and his obsession bordered on the mystical. He would walk around a building 3 times before entering, and demanded that hotel rooms were divisible by 3. Some might say it was superstition, others might call it a mathematical obsession, but for Tesla, it was a ritual as vital as his morning coffee. Then there were the stories of Tesla communicating with Martians. Yes, you heard that right. In 1899, while experimenting in Colorado Springs, Tesla recorded cosmic radio signals he believed were attempts by Martians to communicate. Fast forward to the 21st century, and we'd probably say Tesla had intercepted natural celestial radio waves, but at the time, it was enough to make headlines. Tesla was convinced he was on the brink of interplanetary communication, even if the rest of the world thought he was tuning into lunacy rather than Martian lullabies. Tesla's later years were a cocktail of genius and eccentricity, garnished with financial instability. He juggled groundbreaking ideas with the realities of a dwindling fortune. By the 1910 and 1920s, Tesla was living in New York hotels, often unable to pay his bills. The man who had once dazzled audiences with electric arcs was now more of a forgotten relic than a scientific celebrity. Yet, here's where the legend of Tesla takes a curious turn. Even as his financial struggles intensified, his legacy began to grow in unexpected ways. The world was slowly catching up to his ideas, and institutions like the International Tesla Society were popping up, dedicated to preserving his work. Tesla's name started to appear in science fiction, and his story was retold as a cautionary tale of genius unappreciated. In 1943, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a twist of ironic justice, finally recognized Tesla's original radio patents, effectively overturning Marconi's claims. Unfortunately, this recognition came a few months after Tesla's death, leaving him posthumously vindicated, but without the satisfaction of knowing he had finally been acknowledged. Tesla's later years are a poignant reminder that genius and eccentricity often walk hand in hand, and that the road to innovation is paved with as many pitfalls as breakthroughs. The man who dreamed of lighting up the world found himself living in the shadows, a visionary whose ideas were both his greatest triumphs and most formidable adversaries. Tesla's story, however, doesn't end in obscurity. Instead, it continues to spark curiosity and inspire generations of scientists, engineers, and dreamers. His life was a testament to the power of imagination, a legacy that, like his beloved alternating current, continues to flow through the veins of modern technology. As we leave Tesla tinkering with his inventions and pondering the mysteries of the universe, remember that his story is far from over. There's more intrigue and innovation to explore, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. And here we find ourselves, standing at the crossroads of history and modernity, where Tesla's legacy casts a long, electrifying shadow. In the grand scheme of the technological tapestry, Tesla is less a footnote and more of a blazing headline, his contributions pulsating through the very currents of our daily lives. It's a bit ironic, really, that a man who spent much of his life in the economic dark is now a beacon for innovation and change. Let's start with the most obvious homage to Tesla, the electric car company that bears his name. Tesla, Inc., founded in 2003, is the brainchild of a group of engineers and entrepreneurs, including the ever-quotable Elon Musk. They were inspired by the belief that electric vehicles could be better, quicker, and more fun to drive than gasoline cars. This isn't just a tip of the hat to Tesla's genius. It's a full-on standing ovation. By 2020, Tesla, Inc. had become the world's most valuable car maker, a distinction that surely would have short-circuited the minds of 20th century industrialists. As of 2023, Tesla's market cap has reached astronomical heights, peaking at over $1 trillion. It's safe to say that if Nikola Tesla were around today, he'd probably be riding shotgun in a Model S, grinning like a kid in a candy store of innovation. But Tesla's influence isn't confined to sleek electric cars zooming around city streets. Nope, his fingerprints are all over the resurgence of interest in wireless energy transmission and renewable resources. It seems the world is finally catching up to his century-old vision. In the realm of wireless power, companies like Y-Tricity and Archer are making strides toward making cord-cutting a reality, working on technology that allows devices to charge without ever plugging in. It's the kind of tech that would make Tesla sit up and say, "I told you so," in that charming, slightly smug way only visionaries can. Renewable energy, too, owes a nod to Tesla's far-reaching dreams. His alternating current system laid the groundwork for the efficient generation and distribution of electricity, a critical component in the deployment of wind and solar power. As of 2023, renewable sources contribute to over 29% of global electricity production, a statistic that would have made Tesla's heart hum with the thrill of progress. Now, let's talk about the myths. Tesla, like any good legend, is wrapped in a cloak of half-truths and exaggerations that make for a great story, but often obscure the gritty reality. There's the romantic notion of Tesla as the lone genius, a tortured soul whose brilliance was stifled by an uncaring world. It's a narrative that sells books and tickets, but the truth, as always, is messier. Yes, Tesla was a genius, but he was also a man who struggled with mental health issues and financial instability, a fact that's often glossed over in favor of the more glamorous image of the mad scientist. Then there's the tale of the death ray, a supposed superweapon that Tesla claimed could bring down entire armies. While it's true that Tesla pitched the idea, there's little evidence to suggest he ever built a working model. It's a classic case of myth overshadowing reality, but it speaks volumes about Tesla's flair for the dramatic and his unyielding belief in the power of technology to change the world, for better or worse. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Myths, while often exaggerated, serve a purpose. They inspire and provoke curiosity, keeping the essence of Tesla alive in the collective consciousness. They're like the spark that ignites an engine, driving us to explore, to question, and to innovate. And perhaps that's the most fitting tribute to Tesla's legacy, an unquenchable thirst for knowledge and a dogged pursuit of the impossible. In a world that often seems content to settle for the status quo, Tesla's story is a reminder that imagination is the true currency of progress. It's a lesson that rings as true today as it did in his time, that the most profound advancements are born not from conformity, but from daring to dream differently. So, as we bid adieu to the man who dared to dream of lighting up the world, let's not forget that his story is still being written. Every time a Tesla car zips by, every time we charge our phones wirelessly, every time we harness the wind and sun to power our lives, we're adding a new chapter to the legacy of Nikola Tesla. His life was a testament to the power of vision, a narrative that proves sometimes reality is indeed stranger and more inspiring than fiction. And with that, we leave Tesla not as a relic of the past, but as a perpetual beacon of ingenuity and courage. Because in the end, the true measure of a legacy isn't in the patents or the profits, but in the sparks of inspiration that continue to light the way for dreamers and doers alike. And for that, the world owes Tesla more than just a nod of recognition. It's a standing ovation. In the ancient world, the Phoenicians were like the hipsters who discovered the best-kept secret about the Mediterranean. It was the perfect highway for moving goods, ideas, and yes, a whole lot of purple dye. These folks weren't just another footnote in history. They were the original maritime movers and shakers, setting sail around 1500 BCE, when most people were still figuring out how to domesticate animals. They hailed from the narrow strip of land now known as Lebanon. But don't let their small territory fool you. These seafaring wizards spread their influence across the Mediterranean like a kid spreading peanut butter on toast. The Phoenicians were akin to the Silicon Valley of the ancient Near East. Their cities, Tyre and Sidon, were the Apple and Google headquarters of their day, bustling with innovation and commerce. Tyre was the rock star city, literally built on rocks, and Sidon was its savvy sibling. Together, these cities formed the backbone of a maritime empire that looked less like a sprawling landmass and more like a constellation of trading posts. Their reach extended from the shores of Cyprus to the bustling bazaars of Carthage in present-day Tunisia, an impressive spread for a civilization with no real centralized government. Phoenician city-states were like a collection of fiercely independent tech startups, each vying for dominance in the cutthroat world of ancient commerce. Now let's talk trade. The Phoenicians were the Jeff Bezos of antiquity, except their obsession was with a certain shade of purple. Tyrian purple, named after the city of Tyre, wasn't just any color, it was the color of emperors, and it came from the most unlikely of sources, sea snails. Yep, those slimy little creatures that you probably wouldn't pay much attention to at the beach. It took around 250,000 of these mollusks to produce just 1 ounce of dye, which makes you wonder who first thought, hey, let's boil a bunch of these snails and see if we can make a fashion statement. This dye was the Louis Vuitton of colors, screaming wealth and power to anyone who wore it. But don't let the glamour of purple dye fool you into thinking the Phoenicians' lives were all about luxury. Behind the scenes, their trade networks were a logistical nightmare, with sailors braving tempestuous seas and hostile shores. These traders were the road warriors of their time, navigating the treacherous waters of the Mediterranean with nothing but the stars and their wits to guide them. They weren't just exporting dye. They were trading cedarwood, wine, glass, and even papyrus, a veritable ancient Amazon. Calm, offering a little something for everyone. And let's not forget their alphabet, which they peddled along with their goods. The Phoenicians were the original content creators, developing a script that would eventually evolve into the modern alphabets we use today. Forget hieroglyphs and cuneiform. This was the cool, user-friendly alternative that traders and scribes across the Mediterranean eagerly adopted. Talk about leaving a lasting legacy. It's like inventing the smartphone and watching the world change overnight. But with all this success came a hefty dose of myth-making. The Phoenicians were often romanticized as mysterious sea traders, the stuff of legends and bedtime stories. However, the reality was far grittier. Their trade routes were fraught with danger, from from pirates looking to make a quick buck to unpredictable weather that could sink a ship faster than you could say Tyrian purple. And let's not forget the constant threat of conquest. The Phoenicians were masters of diplomacy, often playing regional powers against each other to maintain their independence, but this was a precarious balancing act. Despite these challenges, the Phoenicians thrived for centuries, crafting a legacy that would last long after their cities had crumbled. They were the unsung heroes of ancient trade, the ones who turned a passion for purple into an empire. Their influence is still felt today, every time we write a letter or see a splash of purple. So the next time you're admiring a royal robe or penning a note, give a nod to those intrepid traders who dared to dream big and sail even bigger. And so, our Phoenician pals, those ancient maritime maestros, didn't just stop at trading purple dye and cedarwood. Oh no, they went ahead and dropped one of history's biggest mic moments, the alphabet. If you think about it, they practically invented the ancient version of a viral meme, spreading their newfangled script from coast to coast like a catchy tune you just can't shake. This wasn't just any script. It was the alphabetic system that would eventually evolve into the letters you're reading right now. Forget about lugging around stone tablets with cuneiform or trying to decipher hieroglyphic squiggles. This was the first step towards the democratization of writing. But don't get too carried away with the idea of Phoenician literacy rates soaring. This alphabet was mainly for those who could afford the luxury of papyrus, a bit like owning the latest iPhone in an era when most people were still rocking flip phones. The genius of the Phoenician alphabet lay in its simplicity. 22 letters, all consonants, which might sound like a game of Wheel of Fortune where no one buys a vowel. Yet, this minimalist approach was revolutionary. It was phonetic, meaning the symbols represented sounds, making it easily adaptable to other languages. It's like the open-source software of the ancient world, inviting everyone to customize it to their own linguistic needs. This script spread faster than gossip in a small town, picked up by the Greeks who added vowels, turning it into something we'd recognize today. The Romans later tweaked it further, giving us the alphabet that would etch its way into the annals of history. But let's not pretend the Phoenicians were out there handing out alphabets like party favors. Their script was a tool of trade, a way to keep tabs on the exchange of goods and tally up debts. Picture this: a merchant in Carthage scribbling down an order for cedarwood or Tyrian purple, his papyrus scroll a lifeline in the web of commerce that stretched from the Levant to the Iberian Peninsula. The Phoenician alphabet was a ledger, a contract, a receipt, just as likely to be found in the hands of a trader as in a scribe's, making it both the Google Docs and Excel spreadsheet of its day. And speaking of trade, the Phoenicians were the LinkedIn of the ancient world, connecting disparate cultures through their vast networks. They didn't just hawk goods, they swapped stories, ideas, and customs. You could say the Mediterranean was their social media platform, with ships as their status updates. They were the ultimate influencers, spreading not just products, but also cultural practices and innovations. When they docked in foreign ports, they brought with them tales of distant lands, exotic wares, and a cosmopolitan ethos that was the envy of more insular societies. Yet, as romantic as this image might be, let's not gloss over the gritty reality. The Phoenicians weren't just charming merchants. They were also shrewd diplomats, navigating the treacherous waters of political alliances. Their city-states, fiercely independent yet interconnected, were adept at playing regional powers against each other to maintain their autonomy. It was like a high-stakes game of chess, with each move potentially leading to prosperity or ruin. They had to be as adept at reading political winds as they were at reading the stars. And then there's the myth of the Phoenicians as mysterious sea traders, an image that has lingered like a fog over history. Sure, there was an air of mystique about their ventures, but it was less about secret treasures and more about survival. They were canny navigators, sure, but they were also at the mercy of the elements, battling storms and pirates with equal tenacity. Their routes were perilous, their ships often one wave away from disaster. So, the next time you jot down a note or type an email, give a nod to the Phoenicians. It might be hard to imagine, but without their alphabetic innovation, we might still be carving out messages on clay tablets. They were the unsung architects of written communication, crafting a legacy that sailed far beyond the horizon of their own time. Yet, as we'll see in the next chapter of their story, this wasn't the end of their influence. The Phoenicians were just getting started, and their impact would ripple through history in ways even they couldn't have predicted. Stay tuned for more tales of ancient innovation and intrigue. And so, as the Phoenicians were penning the prelude to the future of written communication, they were also crafting a political structure that would make even the most seasoned diplomat raise an eyebrow. Forget everything you think you know about empires with grand capitals and centralized power. This was more like a jigsaw puzzle where each piece had its own ambitions, and they only fit together when it suited them. The Phoenician Empire was about as cohesive as a herd of cats, with each city-state operating like its own mini-kingdom. Let's start by tackling one of the most persistent myths, the idea that the Phoenicians were swashbuckling pirates, the Jack Sparrows of antiquity. Sure, they were adept at navigating the treacherous waters of the Mediterranean, but they weren't exactly plundering treasure chests left and right. In reality, the Phoenicians were more like the savvy entrepreneurs, avoiding unnecessary conflict. Think of them as the Steve Jobs of ancient seafaring, focused on innovation and market expansion rather than piracy. They were more interested in trade deals than in hoisting the Jolly Raja. Of course, tales of piracy make for great stories, and who doesn't love a good pirate yarn? But the Phoenicians were pragmatic traders who understood that sinking a ship could mean sinking their own business prospects. Instead of looting, they preferred a more diplomatic approach, often negotiating safe passage with local rulers. This wasn't just about playing nice. It was about ensuring the smooth operation of their extensive trade networks. After all, you can't run an ancient Amazon from a pirate ship. Now, let's dig into the political soup that was Phoenician society. Picture a bustling Mediterranean hub where each city-state is like a modern startup. Tyre and Sidon were the flashy unicorns, while smaller cities like Byblos and Arwad played the role of scrappy disruptors. There was no central authority to crack the whip or keep everyone in line. Instead, it was more like a chaotic potluck where everyone brought their own dish, hoping for the best. This decentralized system might sound like a recipe for disaster, but it worked surprisingly well for the Phoenicians. Each city-state had its own ruler, but they were bound by common interests, mainly trade. Imagine a boardroom where everyone's the CEO, but instead of competing, they figure out how to collaborate when it suits them. It's like a startup culture where everyone's in charge, yet nobody's actually steering the ship. Economic considerations were the glue holding this loose confederation together. The Phoenicians understood the value of specialization long before Adam Smith penned his theories. Tyre might focus on producing that famous purple dye, while Sidon excelled in glass-making. Byblos was the bookworm, dealing in papyrus and scrolls. Each city-state traded what it did best, creating a network that was both resilient and flexible. But don't let this rosy picture fool you into thinking the Phoenicians were singing Kumbaya around the campfire. Rivalries simmered beneath the surface, and alliances could shift as easily as the Mediterranean winds. It was a world where diplomacy was as essential as a sturdy ship. When conflicts did arise, they were usually settled through negotiation, with each city-state keen to protect its own interests. Think of it as the ultimate exercise in political finesse, where the stakes were high and the margins for error were razor-thin. Despite this fragmented political landscape, the Phoenicians managed to maintain their autonomy for centuries, deftly playing regional powers against one another. They were experts at the art of the deal, often using their extensive trade networks as leverage. Need to placate a powerful neighbor like Assyria or Egypt? Just offer them a slice of that lucrative trade pie. It was a delicate balancing act, but one they performed with aplomb. So next time you hear tales of the Phoenician Empire, remember that it was less about iron-fisted rule and more about a web of interdependent city-states. It was a system that defied the conventional wisdom of empire building, proving that sometimes the best way to hold power is not to hold it at all. Instead, they navigated the complexities of the ancient world with a deft hand, turning what could have been a recipe for chaos into a model of cooperation and innovation. In our next look at these ancient mariners, we'll dive even deeper into the sea of their influence, exploring how their trade not only spread goods, but also culture, language, and ideas across continents. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the fascinating tapestry that is the legacy of the Phoenicians. Now, as we sail deeper into the Phoenician saga. Let's focus on the ancient geopolitical chessboard where these maritime maestros played their most daring moves. Imagine the Mediterranean not as a placid blue expanse, but as a bustling marketplace and battlefield where alliances were forged and shattered faster than a sandcastle at high tide. The Phoenicians, ever the clever strategists, were right in the thick of it, navigating their way through the tempestuous waters of diplomacy with the finesse of a grandmaster who moonlights as a trade mogul. First up, the Egyptians. The Phoenicians and the Egyptians had a relationship that was part romance, part business partnership. Think of it like a high-stakes episode of The Bachelor, where the rose is a coveted trade agreement. The Egyptians were particularly fond of the Phoenician cedarwood, which was as indispensable to them as a smartphone is to a millennial. Those towering trees from Lebanon were the backbone, quite literally, of Egyptian shipbuilding and temple construction. And let's not forget the papyrus trade. The Phoenicians were the Goda providers, ensuring that the Egyptians could continue their love affair with hieroglyphs. But don't get too misty-eyed thinking about these ancient trade trysts. The Phoenicians were no fools. They knew that their southern neighbors could be as fickle as the Nile's floodwaters. They skillfully balanced their dealings, ensuring that they remained indispensable but never too cozy. After all, getting too close to a superpower like Egypt was like standing too near the edge of a volcano. Thrilling, but potentially disastrous. Now, let's flip the board and see how the Phoenicians dealt with the Greeks. The Greeks were the new kids on the Mediterranean block, eager to flex their muscles and showcase their philosophical prowess. But while the Greeks were busy pondering the meaning of life, the Phoenicians were busy making a killing in the markets. The relationship between these two cultures was a blend of admiration and rivalry, like two chefs competing for the title of Iron Chef Mediterranean. The Greeks were fascinated by Phoenician culture, and let's be honest, who wouldn't be? The alphabet alone was a cultural bombshell, and the Greeks were quick to snatch it up, adding vowels like a chef adding a secret spice to a family recipe. Yet, while they borrowed liberally from Phoenician innovations, the Greeks weren't above a little competition either. They sought to carve out their own maritime niches, sometimes leading to skirmishes over trading routes and territorial waters. It was less a blood feud and more a spirited sibling rivalry, with both parties eager to outdo each other in commerce and culture. And then there were the Romans. Ah, the Romans, those ambitious empire builders with a penchant for conquest and a taste for the dramatic. By the time Rome rolled into the Mediterranean scene, the Phoenicians had already seeded their influence across the region like a savvy entrepreneur spreading investments. Carthage, the jewel of the Phoenician diaspora, was the crown prince in this tale, and it was here that the Romans found a rival worthy of their attention. The Punic Wars were the epic drama of this ancient saga, a series of 3 conflicts that could be likened to a best-of-3 sporting series, where the stakes were the entire western Mediterranean. The Romans and the Carthaginians, Phoenicians by another name, clashed in a titanic struggle that would ultimately decide who held the keys to the empire. It was a brutal contest, one that saw the legendary Hannibal Barca lead his forces, including elephants, over the Alps in a move so audacious it would make even the boldest strategist blanch. Yet, despite Carthage's initial success, the Romans were nothing if not persistent. They eventually triumphed, razing Carthage to the ground in 146 BCE in a move that was both a statement and a warning. But before you start lamenting the end of the Phoenician saga at the hands of Rome, let's remember that the seeds of their influence had already taken root far and wide. The Romans might have conquered Carthage, but they couldn't erase the Phoenician legacy that had already spread across continents. Through these interactions, the Phoenicians proved themselves to be masters of the geopolitical game, deftly maneuvering through a landscape fraught with danger and opportunity. They were the ultimate pragmatists, understanding that in a world of shifting alliances and constant threat, the key to survival was adaptability. They weren't just traders. They were diplomats, innovators, and cultural ambassadors, leaving a legacy that would echo through history. In this game of ancient chess, the Phoenicians were never the kings or queens. They were the knights and bishops, moving in unexpected ways to carve out their niche. Their influence lingered long after the last Phoenician city had fallen, a testament to their enduring impact on the cultures they encountered. As we continue to unravel the threads of their story, we'll see just how deep this influence ran and how it shaped the world in ways that even the Phoenicians themselves might never have imagined. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the fascinating legacy of these ancient mariners and merchants. So, as the Phoenicians found themselves in the crosshairs of history's most ambitious empire, the final chapters of their saga began to unfold. Enter Rome, the ancient juggernaut with an insatiable appetite for expansion. By the 3rd century BCE, the Mediterranean was less of a peaceful blue pond and more of a Roman bathtub, and the Phoenicians, particularly those in Carthage, were the last major players standing between Rome and complete maritime dominance. The Punic Wars were less about ideology and more about who got to call dibs on the Mediterranean's prime real estate. The first of these wars erupted in 264 BCE and was basically a 23-year marathon of naval skirmishes, with Rome's fledgling navy learning the ropes, quite literally, from the seasoned Carthaginian sailors. By the time the dust settled in 241 BCE, Rome had annexed Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, squeezing Carthage's Mediterranean monopoly tighter than a pair of skinny jeans after Thanksgiving. But Carthage wasn't down for the count just yet. Under the indomitable leadership of Hannibal Barca, they launched the Second Punic War in 218 BCE. Hannibal's daring march over the Alps, complete with war elephants, wasn't just audacious. It was the historical equivalent of pulling a rabbit out of a hat while juggling flaming swords. Despite his early victories, Rome's persistence and strategic brilliance eventually turned the tide. By 201 BCE, Carthage had been forced to surrender, its empire reduced to a shadow of its former glory. The Third Punic War, if you can call a 3-year siege a war, was Rome's final act of vengeance. In 149 BCE, they laid siege to Carthage, a move that was as much about sending a message as it was about military strategy. By 146 BCE, Carthage was obliterated, its city razed, its population enslaved, and its fields sown with salt, according to the dramatic, though likely exaggerated, tales. The Romans weren't just conquering, they were rewriting the script, ensuring that Carthage's legacy would be buried under layers of Roman triumphalism. But here's the twist. While Rome might have crushed Carthage physically, the spirit of the Phoenicians had already permeated the Mediterranean and beyond. Their innovations in trade, navigation, and communication were woven into the very fabric of ancient society, leaving a mark that Rome couldn't erase. The Phoenician penchant for maritime trade had set the stage for global commerce long before anyone had ever heard of Wall Street. Their knack for navigation, using the stars as their guide long before GPS was a glimmer in anyone's eye, was revolutionary. They were the original masters of the sea lanes, charting courses that others would follow for centuries. And let's not forget their linguistic legacy, the alphabet. The Greeks might have added vowels and called it their own, but it was the Phoenicians who handed the world the blueprint for written communication. In a world where literacy was power, this was their ultimate gift. The decline of Phoenician power didn't mean the end of their influence. Their trade networks, though fragmented, had already established a blueprint for economic exchange that would echo throughout history. Their city-states might have been swallowed by empires, but the idea of independent, interconnected hubs of commerce didn't vanish. It evolved. Fast forward to today, and you can see the Phoenician spirit in every global trade agreement and every bustling port city. As for their legacy in modern culture, look no further than the remnants of their influence scattered across languages and industries. The term Byblos, one of their ancient cities, is the root of the word Bible, a nod to their role in the papyrus trade. The color purple, once the calling card of Phoenician dye makers, remains a symbol of luxury and power. And every time we use alphabets to communicate, we are tipping our hats to those ancient scribes who first saw the potential of a few simple letters. So, what can we learn from the Phoenicians? Perhaps it's that true power lies not in the might of armies or the grandeur of empires, but in the quiet, persistent influence of ideas and innovations. The Phoenicians remind us that being adaptable, shrewd, and innovative can leave a legacy that endures long after the last ship has sailed. In the grand tapestry of history, the Phoenicians might not dominate the headlines, but their contributions are the threads that hold the whole thing together. They were the unsung architects of globalization, the pioneers of trade and communication who dared to explore the unknown. Their story is a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity and the timeless quest to chart new horizons. As we wrap up this journey through Phoenician history, let's remember them not just as traders and sailors, but as the original influencers, whose ripples are still felt in the waves of modern civilization.